You went on a date, she was sweet, kind, emotionally mature, probably even a better person than most you've met, but she didn't attract you physically. Maybe it was her weight or something about the way she carried herself. You knew you didn't want to see her again, but when she messaged you later, you didn't say that. You told her she was great, but you're not in the right place for something serious. Or you didn't feel the spark. You lied and you knew it, but you weren't trying to protect her. You were protecting yourself from how you'd be seen if you said the real reason. This is the social rejection filter. It's not about being polite. It's about managing how people perceive your reasons, your honesty, your morality. You filter your actions not because you're afraid of consequences, but because you're afraid of judgment. Same thing when a guy gets rejected by a girl who says you're amazing, just not for me, when the real reason is that his job doesn't pay enough or he doesn't have the right look. She's not lying to save him. She's lying so she doesn't look like a shallow person. This is how the filter works. It hides what we truly think or feel, not to protect others, but to preserve our own image in their eyes. And the deeper truth is this: we filter not just what we say, but how we act. You laugh at jokes that don't land. You pretend to like people you don't respect. You agree with things you don't believe just enough to blend in, to avoid being the one who ruins the mood, the one who breaks the flow, the one who's too much. We all perform this dance, adjusting our opinions, reactions, and responses depending on who's watching. At work, with in-laws, at dinner parties, the filter is always on. You don't tell your colleague his idea was terrible. You say, interesting direction. You don't tell your friend their partner is emotionally immature. You say, I just hope they treat you well. You're not being kind, you're being cautious. But this doesn't mean people are fake. It means people are programmed to survive socially. Rejection isn't just uncomfortable, it's biologically painful. The same brain areas that process physical pain light up during social exclusion. So your brain evolves to avoid it, to anticipate it, to dodge the words or actions that might trigger it. That's the origin of the filter. And the more power someone has to hurt or exclude you, emotionally, professionally, socially, the stronger the filter becomes. Around your boss, the filter sharpens. Around someone attractive, it tightens. Around someone emotionally reactive, it becomes airtight. You speak in softened tones, you choose safe words, you leave things unsaid. The problem is, the longer you live with this filter always on, the harder it is to turn it off. You start forgetting what you actually think. You start doubting your own feelings. You become someone who performs truth but never lives it. The social rejection filter is a mirror. It shows how much you're willing to reshape yourself just to remain likable. And maybe the most dangerous part is the people around you never get to know you. They get to know your caution, your strategy, your emotional risk management, but not you. And yet, try being brutally honest for one full day. See how many people pull away, get defensive, feel attacked. That's the paradox. We say we value truth, but we punish the people who give it to us unfiltered. So we learn to walk the line between honesty and safety. And in that space, most real connections die before they even begin. You walk into a bus with 20 empty seats. There's only one person already sitting. Without even thinking, you walk all the way to the opposite end and sit far away. No one told you to. No sign says don't sit next to strangers, but you know better. This is the public distance norm, the silent law of space. It governs how far you stand, where you sit, how you interact with people in public spaces. Break it and you won't go to jail, but you will be seen as strange, socially off, maybe even threatening. Same rule applies in men's bathrooms. 5 urinals, one guy using the middle one. You don't pick the one next to him. You go far right or far left. If all are taken, you wait. This isn't about hygiene. It's not about logic. It's about an ancient instinct: give people their bubble. You can feel it in elevators too. Everyone spreads out as much as they can. Eyes forward, no talking, no touching. If someone breaks the silence, it better be for a clear, acceptable reason. Otherwise, it feels like a violation of privacy, of safety, of the social contract. People don't like being too close to someone they don't know, especially without context. Proximity implies familiarity, and without trust, that closeness triggers alarm bells in the nervous system. It says, this person doesn't respect my boundary. And so we avoid it. We space ourselves out in movie theaters, waiting rooms, park benches. Even if it's raining, even if we're tired, we'd rather stand than be uncomfortably close. It's also why people make themselves smaller in public, holding their bags in their lap, turning their shoulders away, crossing their legs toward a wall. It's all part of the performance, signaling to others, I'm not here to intrude. But here's the twist: as soon as context changes, the rule changes. In a crowded subway, you're shoulder to shoulder with strangers. No problem, because the situation gives permission. It's expected. But if that same stranger sat next to you on an empty bench, now it's unsettling, because now it feels intentional. This rule even shapes how we approach people socially. If you want to talk to someone you don't know, you need a reason. Hey, is this seat taken? Do you have the time? The question is often fake, but it justifies the interaction. Without it, approaching feels like crossing a wire. We rarely talk about this rule, but we obey it every day, and when someone doesn't, we notice. We don't always confront it, we just label them internally. Weird, pushy, off. The public distance norm is what makes urban life bearable. In a world of constant crowding, it creates invisible boundaries. It says, I see you, but I won't get too close, and in return, you offer me the same courtesy. But it also comes with a cost. It creates a culture where closeness must always be justified, where random connection becomes rare, where even eye contact feels like a risk. And maybe that's why so many people feel lonely in public, not because they're isolated, but because they're surrounded by people who are all pretending the others don't exist. You meet someone for the first time, their handshake is firm, their clothes are sharp, their teeth are straight. Before they've said a word, your brain has already assigned them traits: competent, intelligent, trustworthy. You don't know them, but their appearance told you a story and you believed it. This is appearance bias. It's not about beauty, it's about what beauty or the appearance of effort signals. Good posture implies confidence. Clean nails imply discipline, clear skin implies health, a symmetrical face, genetics, all of it adds up to one thing: your brain assumes that the outside reflects the inside. And it works both ways. Someone stutters, wears clothes that don't fit, has messy hair, dark circles, bad posture. You assume they're less capable, less successful, less sharp. You don't say it, but you act like it. Maybe you're slower to trust them. Maybe you're less open to their ideas. Maybe you're already ranking them below someone else who looked more put together. This bias is automatic. It doesn't ask for your permission. You see someone attractive, you assume they're more competent, even if you know nothing about their skills. You see someone with certain fashion, you assume they're creative, trendy, maybe even smarter. You see someone overweight, you might assume laziness, lack of control, even if their personality proves the opposite. The look hits first. The truth comes later, if ever. It plays out in hiring, in dating, in courtrooms, in customer service. Good-looking people are more likely to be seen as leaders, more likely to be promoted, more likely to be forgiven. Studies show they even get lighter prison sentences for the same crimes. And it's not just face and body, it's everything visual. The logo on your shoes, the brand of your phone, the way your resume is formatted. We live in a visual culture, and perception is currency. That's why people spend hours editing photos before posting. Why influencers pour money into lighting, angles, and color grading, not just to look good, but to signal control, confidence, competence. Because deep down, we know how the world responds to the package before it even considers what's inside. Appearance bias doesn't mean looks are everything. It means looks are the first thing, and in a fast-moving world, first impressions often become final ones. People rarely take the time to dig deeper, and if your appearance doesn't give them a reason to, they move on. And yet, ironically, we all say things like, I care more about personality, or don't judge a book by its cover. But we do, every day, because the brain evolved to make quick decisions. In the wild, it had to. Hesitation meant danger. Today, hesitation means disinterest, so we default to what we see. That's why someone wearing glasses is often assumed to be smarter. Why tall people are more likely to be seen as leaders. Why people who dress slightly better than average often command more respect, even if they say nothing different. You don't have to like it, but you can't ignore it. And perhaps the most brutal part, you're not only judged by others, you judge yourself the same way. You feel more confident on days you look better. You perform differently depending on how you're dressed. Your reflection changes your posture, your voice, your willingness to speak up. Appearance shapes perception, and perception shapes opportunity. It's not fair, but it's real. And until someone sees past the cover decides the story. You wake up anxious, your chest is tight, your mind is spiraling. But when you walk into work, you smile, you say good morning like nothing's wrong. You ask how others are doing, not because you care in that moment, but because it's expected. You're performing normal. This is false normalcy signaling, the act of pretending you're emotionally stable, even when you're not. It's the invisible mask that says, I'm fine, even when everything inside is unraveling. You do it on Zoom calls, on dates, at family dinners. You nod, you laugh, you participate, even when your body is begging you to disappear. And most of the time, no one notices, because they're doing it too. This rule is so embedded in daily life that it feels automatic. You answer, "I'm good, how are you?" without thinking, even when you're not good, even when you're falling apart. Because saying, "I'm not okay," derails the script. It breaks the rhythm. It creates tension people don't want to hold. So we all agree to keep the performance going. This happens especially in social media. You post vacation photos, selfies, celebrations, even if they're from the past, even if your current reality is bleak. You maintain the illusion that everything is steady, not because you're proud, but because you're scared of seeming unstable. And it's not always conscious. Sometimes you don't even realize you're faking it. You've done it for so long that the smile isn't fake anymore, it's rehearsed. It activates automatically, like a defense mechanism, like muscle memory. But under the surface, the truth builds pressure. The longer you pretend, the more disconnected you feel. And the irony, the more normal you seem, the less likely anyone is to check in. You become invisible behind your own performance. This rule thrives in environments that reward surface-level composure. Corporate jobs, family gatherings, romantic first impressions, people want predictability, stability. So even if you're in chaos, the rule says, don't show it. It's why people say you seemed fine when someone breaks down, because they seemed fine, that's all anyone saw. False normalcy signaling isn't about lying, it's about survival. It's a shield, a way to keep functioning in a world that punishes vulnerability unless it's perfectly timed, perfectly phrased, and socially safe. But it comes with a cost. You start to feel like no one really knows you, like your life is a set, like you're the only one breaking under the pressure while everyone else glides through. But the truth is they're not, they're just better at hiding it. This rule isolates people, makes them feel alone in their sadness, ashamed of their struggle, and it convinces them that the only way to belong is to pretend. So we keep faking smiles, we keep saying I'm fine. We keep up the act, not because we're dishonest, but because we're afraid of what might happen if we drop it. And deep down, we all know the performance is mutual. We're all just waiting for someone else to be the first to break character. You meet someone at a party, you don't ask them what they fear most. You don't ask if they're truly happy. You ask them what they do for a living, where they're from, if they've seen the new show on Netflix. It's not because you care about their job or their weekend plans, it's because that's the script. That's how we start. This is the surface talk protocol, the unwritten rule that says, start light, stay safe. Conversations begin at the surface because the surface is non-threatening. It allows two people to assess each other without risk, without vulnerability, without stakes. You ask someone how they are, they say good, and you know they're not always good, they know it too, but it doesn't matter. The phrase is a handshake, a signal that you're both following the rules. You say crazy weather, not because you're fascinated by the climate, but because you're searching for common ground that doesn't require revealing anything real. You're saying, I'm normal, you're normal, let's stay here for now. And if someone breaks this rule too early, by oversharing, by jumping into trauma, by being too intense, it creates discomfort. Not because their story is wrong, but because they skipped the ladder. They moved too fast through layers of trust. We've been trained since childhood to respect these layers. Say hello, be polite, don't get too personal, and over time this turns into habit, into ritual, into rules no one speaks but everyone obeys. It's why even close friends often start phone calls with 5 minutes of fluff before getting to what really matters. The protocol isn't just for strangers, it's embedded into the rhythm of social interaction. Start safe, move slowly, earn depth. This rule keeps conversations socially digestible. It prevents awkwardness, discomfort, emotional overload, but it also creates a strange effect. People can talk for hours and still know nothing about each other. You can go on 5 dates and still not know how someone thinks when they're alone, because neither of you ever left the surface. We talk about goals but not doubts. We talk about hobbies but not habits. We talk about what happened today but not how it felt. And when someone breaks that pattern, when someone says, actually, I'm not okay today, or do you ever feel like you're faking everything? It either creates connection or it makes people freeze, because now the rules are gone and realness is in the room. The surface talk protocol exists for a reason. Not everyone is safe. Not everyone earns your inner world, but if it becomes the default for every interaction, you can find yourself surrounded by people and still starving for connection. Because you've talked, but you haven't been heard. You're sitting in a group. Someone says something off, maybe mildly sexist, maybe politically tone-deaf, maybe just plain wrong. You catch it immediately. You feel the tension in the air, but you don't say anything. Not because you agree, but because you've learned that challenging it might cause more problems than letting it slide. This is tolerant ignorance, the silent decision to let ignorance pass unchallenged for the sake of social harmony. You hear it, you know it's wrong, but you calculate the cost of responding and often decide it's not worth it. You don't want to be that person, the one who starts arguments, the one who can't take a joke, the one who makes things awkward so you let it go. Maybe you roll your eyes, maybe you change the subject, maybe you laugh not because it's funny, but because silence would say too much. This happens in families, in friend groups, in offices. Someone says something outdated, biased, misinformed, and people around them do the math. Is this worth pushing back on? Will they even listen? Will it ruin the mood? So the comment floats there, untouched, uncorrected, but not unnoticed. Everyone heard it, everyone felt the shift, but no one wants the confrontation. And that's the core of the rule. Protect the group dynamic, even if it means letting something wrong slide. It's not always cowardice. Sometimes it's exhaustion. You've corrected this person before, they didn't change, so now you save your energy. Other times it's pragmatism. You're at work, you need this job, you're not about to start a moral crusade during lunch break. And then there's hierarchy. If the person saying the ignorant thing has more power, social, professional, emotional, the tolerance gets stronger, because challenging them feels like punching up, and punching up has consequences. But even when there's no real power imbalance, just social tension, people default to avoidance. Because calling something out often makes you the problem, not the person who said it. You become the one who overreacted, the one who killed the vibe, the one who made it uncomfortable, and ironically, that discomfort usually gets more attention than the original offense. Tolerant ignorance is the price people pay to keep the peace, even when that peace is fake. It allows bad ideas to survive inside silence. It lets people stay ignorant without friction. It turns values into private thoughts instead of public boundaries. And over time, it teaches people to stop trying, to just nod, smile, and store their disagreement in silence. Because disagreeing out loud doesn't just cost energy, it costs belonging. So the group stays intact, the flow remains smooth, and the quiet part, it stays quiet. You're talking to someone who's clearly more dominant in the conversation. They're louder, more confident, maybe older, maybe in a higher position. They say something you don't fully agree with, maybe about politics, maybe a social opinion, maybe just a personal take. You feel that subtle pressure. Your brain instantly runs a risk assessment. If I disagree right now, what happens? So instead you nod, you say, yeah, totally. Maybe you add a soft, I get what you mean, or a fake laugh. You agree not because you believe, but because disagreement feels like a threat. This is the forced agreement reflex. It's not about politeness, it's about safety. When someone has more social leverage, even temporarily, your brain lines toward harmony, even at the cost of truth. You do it in job interviews, in classrooms, in group dynamics where one voice dominates, but you also do it casually with people you like. You agree because you don't want to disrupt the mood, seem confrontational, or be perceived as difficult. Sometimes you don't even realize you're doing it. The words, yeah, exactly, just come out, even if internally you're screaming no, not at all. And once you've agreed, now you're stuck. Now if you backtrack or clarify, it makes things weird, so you stay quiet, you stay in sync, but you feel fake. This reflex is often stronger in people who grew up in unstable households where disagreement led to punishment or shame, or in people who have experienced rejection for being too intense, too opinionated, too direct. So they adapt. They become agreeable not by nature but by necessity. And the irony, the more agreeable you are, the more people like you, the more they trust you, the more they want you around, but they don't know you. They know your mask, the version of you that makes everything easier for them. Over time, this reflex creates fatigue. You start to feel invisible in your own relationships. You're always agreeable but never understood. You're included but not seen, because you've trained people to expect compliance, not authenticity. And the worst part, when you finally do speak your mind, people act like you've changed, like you're being aggressive, like you've never said that before. but you have, just not out loud. The forced agreement reflex keeps things smooth, it keeps people happy, but it slowly deletes your voice one nod at a time. You've had a terrible day, maybe someone betrayed you, maybe you're overwhelmed, maybe you're just emotionally raw for no obvious reason. But when someone asks, "How are you?" you smile, you say, "I'm fine," and the mask goes on. This is emotional masking, the social rule that says, don't show too much. Hide the storm, keep it clean, make it digestible. You've probably been doing it for years, at school, at work, in relationships. You've learned exactly how much emotion is acceptable. A little stress, fine. A bad day, maybe. But deep sadness, anger, panic, that's too much. That makes people uncomfortable. That makes you dramatic. So you adjust, you say, "just tired," when you're actually drowning. You say, "I'm just being silly," when you're genuinely hurt. You laugh it off, you redirect, you minimize. Because showing emotion is a risk. It creates questions, it demands space, and not everyone wants to give it. Especially in professional settings, emotional masking becomes survival. You show up to meetings while grieving, you take calls while anxious, you perform stability while breaking, because if you show the truth, you might be seen as unstable, unreliable, weak. But this isn't limited to work. In relationships, people often mask their emotions to avoid conflict. You say it's okay when it's not. You say I understand when you don't. You say don't worry about it while your chest tightens. This constant suppression builds pressure. You start to feel disconnected from yourself. You start to believe that your feelings are too much, that you're too much. And when you do finally express something real, maybe you cry, maybe you snap, it feels explosive. Not because the emotion is too big, but because it's been caged too long. The problem is people reward the mask. They tell you you're strong, resilient, so composed. But that praise often reinforces the silence. It tells you, the more you hide, the more they respect you. So you become excellent at pretending, at packaging pain into humor, at smiling while your stomach knots. You become a master of seeming okay. But the cost is high. You start to wonder if anyone knows you, if anyone would love you unmasked, if anyone could even handle it. Emotional masking keeps things smooth, professional, polite, but it also isolates, because if no one ever sees what's real, no one can truly reach you. You're going through something heavy, maybe your relationship just ended, maybe you lost someone, maybe your mental health is slipping, but when you talk to others, you brush it off. You mention it quickly, vaguely, like a line in passing, then change the subject. You say, "It's been rough, but I'm okay," or "No big deal, just some stuff." Because you don't want sympathy. You don't want the looks, the slow head nods, the drawn-out "I'm so sorry." You don't want to be the person everyone tiptoes around. You want to feel normal, not like a project, not like someone who needs to be handled delicately. This is sympathy avoidance, the quiet refusal to receive emotional pity, not because you don't need support, but because sympathy feels like exposure. It makes your pain public. It turns it into a social object, something others can look at, examine, respond to. And most of the time, the responses feel rehearsed. "If you need anything, I'm here. Stay strong, you'll get through it." Well-meaning words, but hollow, predictable, not always real. So instead of opening up, you shut down, you manage your pain privately. You talk about it only in controlled doses, only with people you trust to not get weird, not get overly sentimental. You avoid sympathy because you don't want to be emotionally reduced. You want to be treated like a person, not a fragile case. And then there's the guilt. You feel bad bringing your problems into a space where others are trying to stay upbeat. You don't want to drain the room, so you minimize, you say, "It's not that serious," even when it is. This also connects to pride. Accepting sympathy can feel like admitting defeat, like saying, "Yes, I'm broken." And some part of you wants to stay in control, even if that control is a mask. So you reject the softness, the pity, the comforting touch, not because it's wrong, but because it feels like it makes you smaller. But the price of this avoidance is isolation. People think you're fine, so they don't check in. They think you're strong, so they assume you've got it handled. And the silence around your struggle becomes louder. Eventually, someone might find out just how bad it really was, and they'll say, "Why didn't you say anything?" But you did, just not in the way they were listening for. You're in the middle of a conversation and someone says something that crosses a line. It could be a passive insult, a dismissive tone, or an opinion that deeply clashes with your values. Your instinct tells you to push back, to say something, but instead you pause and let it pass. You don't argue, you don't correct, you move on like nothing happened. This is conflict evasion, the behavioral reflex to avoid disagreement, tension, or confrontation, even when you know you're compromising yourself to do it. You use it with family, with coworkers, in romantic relationships, even in friendships, not because you're weak, but because you've learned that most arguments don't end in clarity. They end in escalation, in defensiveness, in people digging their heels in. So you start making internal trades. I could say something right now and be right, but I'll lose the mood, the comfort, the flow. Is it worth it? Most of the time, your answer is no. So you laugh off rude comments. You say, fair enough, when someone's clearly wrong. You say you might be right, even when you know they're not. And sometimes you replay the moment hours later, thinking of all the things you should have said. But in that moment, your priority was social peace, not personal accuracy. Conflict evasion often comes from experience. Maybe you grew up around people who exploded over disagreement. Maybe you learned that speaking up just meant getting shut down. Or maybe you were always the one smoothing things over, so much that it became a skill. Now you're the person who avoids fights at all costs, even if it means letting people misunderstand you, even if it means swallowing resentment, even if it means bottling your opinions until they turn into exhaustion. You tell yourself you're being mature, you tell yourself you're choosing peace, but sometimes you're just afraid. Afraid that if you bring the conflict to the surface, people will see a version of you that they don't like, the serious one, the emotional one, the angry one. And over time, this rule erodes your identity. You become the person who never causes trouble, the easy one, the chill one, but inside there's a growing list of things you never said, boundaries you never enforced, truths you never voiced. Until one day someone crosses a line and you finally snap. Not because they were worse than the others, but because they were the last straw, and to them, it seems sudden, but to you, it's been building for years. Conflict evasion buys you comfort in the moment, but it often costs you clarity, connection, and eventually, your voice. You're not always yourself in public. You might smile more, speak less, act a little more agreeable than usual. You keep your tone soft, your takes neutral, your edges smoothed out. Not because you're fake, but because you know which version of yourself won't trigger reactions. You've learned who you need to be in order to be left alone, liked, or welcomed. This is safe persona projection, the subtle construction of a socially approved version of yourself. A version that doesn't offend, doesn't disturb, doesn't provoke curiosity, judgment, or rejection. You do it at work by using polite, non-committal language, at family dinners by staying quiet during certain topics, on dates by being nice before being honest, and online by shaping your words to sound just smart enough, just witty enough, just vulnerable enough, but never too much of anything. This persona is curated. It's not a full lie, it's a filtered truth, a calculated version of your real self, trimmed to fit. It's why you say things like, haha, I'm just weird like that, to make your deeper instincts sound cute, or why you say, I don't really know much about that, when you're actually just afraid your opinion won't land well. You adjust yourself depending on who's watching, a constant shapeshift to reduce risk. And people love this version of you because it's pleasant, easy to digest, it doesn't make waves. But that's the problem, they love the version you built for safety, not the one that lives underneath. This rule often forms early. You learn which traits get praised and which ones get punished. If you were too loud, you were told to quiet down. Too intense, you were too much. Too emotional, calm down. Over time, the raw parts of you get wrapped in soft language and humor, and the result is someone likable but distant from their center. And it works, you become popular, respected, so easy to be around. But behind closed doors, you might feel like a product, a character, a version of yourself who's slowly drifting from the core. Because no one can validate a version of you they've never seen. And every compliment to your safe persona feels just a little hollow, because deep down, you know it wasn't fully you. Safe persona projection is about minimizing threat. It helps you survive in unpredictable environments, but if it becomes permanent, you'll start to lose the ability or the courage to show people what's actually underneath. And worse, you might start to believe the act yourself. You're in a conversation that's dragging, maybe it's boring, maybe it's one-sided, maybe you just don't have the energy, but instead of cutting it off directly, you start performing politeness. You say things like, yeah, totally, with a nod. You check your phone, you look around the room, you laugh less, you drop phrases like anyway, or we should catch up again soon. But you don't really mean it. You're not interested in continuing. You're just trying to exit without making it obvious. This is polite disengagement, the art of silently backing out of a social interaction without being direct, honest, or confrontational. You don't want to hurt the person, you don't want to create tension, so you fake the appearance of interest just long enough to slip away without burning the bridge. You do it with strangers, acquaintances, coworkers, and sometimes even with friends, especially when you're emotionally tired or simply disinterested. But instead of saying, "Hey, I've got to go," or "I'm not in the mood to talk right now," you play the game, you nod, you echo their words, you use safe phrases like "let's talk later," even if you don't plan to. This rule is especially common in professional and networking spaces. You can't just walk away, so you create the illusion of warmth while slowly detaching. You keep smiling even as your mind is halfway out the door. But it happens in deeper relationships too, when someone keeps texting you and you don't know how to respond, so you start replying slower, shorter. You add emojis to soften the decline. Or when someone opens up emotionally and you're not ready for that kind of wait, so you redirect, delay, dilute. You're not trying to be cruel, you're trying to end things without consequence, without being the bad guy, without having to explain, because honesty would feel too sharp, and avoidance would feel too obvious. So you land somewhere in between, pretending to engage while gradually retreating. And it works kind of. The other person might pick up on the cues, they might back off themselves. No words exchanged, no conflict, just a quiet fade, but sometimes it creates confusion, because they're still reading your politeness as interest. That's when the rule backfires. You think you're being gentle, but you're actually dragging it out, giving them hope where there shouldn't be any, leaving the door cracked just enough to keep them waiting. Polite disengagement is a social lubricant. It protects both parties from the sting of rejection, but it also makes communication blurry. It teaches people to read between lines that were never clearly drawn, and it creates a culture where no one really knows what nice means anymore, because it might just mean, "I want out, but I don't want to look rude doing it." You haven't spoken in months. No calls, no deep conversations, no actual time spent together, but you still like each other's posts. You reply with a heart emoji to their story. You send the occasional "haha, this reminded me of you" meme, and somehow that's enough to keep the connection alive. This is passive friendship maintenance, the illusion of closeness sustained by minimal, low-effort interactions. It's not that you don't care about the person, it's that you don't have the energy or the time for active maintenance. So instead, you invest just enough to keep the tie from breaking. You tell yourself we're still good, nothing's wrong, but the truth is most of the relationship now lives in silent gestures, likes, reactions, happy birthday texts, maybe the occasional "we need to catch up soon," with no actual plan. And both sides understand the game. Neither wants to admit the friendship is fading. Neither wants the responsibility of rekindling it, so the digital breadcrumbs become a proxy for presence. This kind of friendship exists in limbo. You're not strangers, but you're no longer deeply connected either. You just hover near each other's lives, close enough to comment, too far to matter. And here's the strange part, these passive signals still trigger emotional responses. A like can feel like validation. A message out of nowhere can revive old warmth, but the feeling is brief because there's no depth beneath it. It's a spark with no fuel. You do this because it's easy, because initiating a real conversation requires effort, vulnerability, time, and you're busy or numb or unsure how to reconnect, so you settle for symbolic connection. It's better than nothing, but not by much. And it's not just your fault, everyone's doing it. Life gets loud, people move, priorities shift. Active friendships get replaced by mutual digital witnessing. You see their life from a distance, and that becomes the friendship. But eventually, something breaks the illusion. You realize you don't know what they're going through, or they post something deep, and you realize you have no idea who they are anymore. And in that moment, the emojis don't feel like enough. Passive friendship maintenance is a modern comfort. It lets people stay in touch without really touching. But if all your friendships live there, you'll start to feel surrounded, but alone. Because acknowledgement isn't connection, and proximity isn't presence. They invited you to their birthday last year, so now you feel like you have to invite them to yours. They came to your event, so you owe them your attendance. They helped you move once, so now you can't say no when they ask for a favor, even if you don't feel close anymore. Even if you don't want to go, you do it anyway, because it would feel wrong not to. This is the mutual obligation trap, the invisible contract that forms when favors, kindness, or support are exchanged, turning relationships into running ledgers. No one says it out loud, but the math is always running in the background. I did this for you, now it's your turn. And if you don't return the gesture, you feel like a bad friend, ungrateful, disloyal. It doesn't matter how much you wanted to do the original thing, it still creates a psychological debt. Because social norms say that relationships must be balanced, not just emotionally, but in effort, time, presence, and support. So now you find yourself doing things you don't enjoy, going places you don't want to go, staying in touch with people you don't connect with anymore just because it would feel wrong to pull back. You can't say no because no sounds ungrateful, and you can't fully disconnect because it feels like betrayal. The trap tightens with time. The more you give, the more you owe or are owed, and that tension builds silently. Someone does a big favor for you, and instead of feeling free, you feel trapped. Now you owe them. Now you can't say no, not for a while, not without guilt. And the worst part, sometimes the other person doesn't even expect anything, but the expectation lives in your head, because you've internalized the rule that relationships must be fair, and if they're not, someone's failing. So instead of doing things from a place of joy, you do them from pressure, and slowly the friendship starts to feel like work. But there's also the other side. When you give a lot and it's not returned, you don't say anything, but you feel it. You notice the imbalance, and you start to pull back, maybe without a word, because while the trap can make you overgive, it can also make you quietly resent. The mutual obligation trap keeps people bound together longer than they should be. It creates invisible chains of debt and repayment until the relationship is more about fairness than connection. And sometimes the only way to break the trap is to admit, you don't owe me anything, and I don't owe you either. But most people never say that, so the cycle continues, quiet, tense, polite. You're at a friend's art show. You look at the piece they just finished, a swirl of aggressive brush strokes and vague symbolism. Deep down, you don't get it, you don't like it. It feels loud, unrefined, maybe even lazy. But when they ask you what you think, you don't hesitate. It's amazing, you say, so bold, so expressive. You overcompensate, piling on praise that sounds genuine even though it's scripted. This is the false enthusiasm display, the unwritten rule that when someone offers you a part of themselves, you're supposed to act excited, even if you're not, especially if you're not. It happens in everyday interactions. Someone tells you about a business idea that's flawed, you say it's genius. Someone sings off-key, you say they have potential. Someone shares a story that's clearly boring or self-indulgent. You still nod, smile, and add, "That's so cool." Because what matters isn't what you feel, it's what they expect to hear. And the more vulnerable the other person is, the more pressure you feel to perform enthusiasm. Because rejecting their idea, even softly, feels like rejecting them. And so the fake excitement becomes emotional padding, a way to protect both of you from the sting of disconnection. This rule shows up especially in creative fields. Music, writing, content creation. Your friend posts a song that's generic and repetitive, but you hype it up. Not because it moved you, but because silence would feel like betrayal. You know they're proud of it, so you reward their vulnerability with exaggerated praise. It's what good friends do, right? But what happens over time is this. People lose track of what's actually good. They start believing in their own inflated feedback loops, and the same friends who once told them the truth become the audience clapping at every beat, no matter how off-key. False enthusiasm also operates in dating. You go on a first date, it's awkward, no chemistry, but instead of being honest, you smile wide, thank them profusely, and say, "We should totally do this again." Why? Because rejecting someone clearly, even kindly, feels cruel. So instead, you fake positivity and ghost them later. Easier for you, cleaner for them, on the surface. At work, the rule becomes professional currency. Your coworker shares an idea in a meeting, a recycled thought wrapped in buzzwords. Everyone nods, says that's a good point. No one actually likes it, but no one wants to be the one who pops the bubble, because the cost of real feedback is emotional discomfort, and that's rarely worth it in group dynamics. We're trained to reward effort, not outcome. If someone tried, we feel obligated to clap. If someone shared, we feel obligated to smile, even if the performance was weak, even if the product was bad, even if we're lying through our teeth. But what does this do to truth? What does it do to trust? It creates relationships where you can't tell if someone actually likes your work or if they're just protecting your ego. It creates environments where no one gets better because no one hears what they need to. It creates people who mistake applause for quality because that's all they've ever known. And the darker side is this: false enthusiasm isn't always about kindness. Sometimes it's self-protection. You praise because you don't want to be disliked. You say wow because you don't want tension. You celebrate mediocrity because honesty feels like a social risk. So we all keep clapping, we all keep smiling, we all keep exaggerating reactions not for truth but for safety. And somewhere along the way, genuine excitement becomes harder to read. When someone says, "I love this," do they mean it, or are they just following the rule? False enthusiasm display keeps things smooth, it keeps egos intact, but it also builds relationships on a foundation of careful lies. And eventually people start to wonder, does anyone really believe me, or are they just being nice again? You care about them, you miss them, you think about them often, but you don't say it, you don't text first, you don't call out of nowhere, you don't send messages like, "Hey, I just wanted to tell you I really appreciate you." Because that kind of affection, unprompted, unprotected, breaks the rule. This is the invisible affection rule, the silent agreement that emotional closeness must be measured, delayed, or disguised. Not because you don't feel it, but because expressing it too directly feels exposed, risky, awkward, or even inappropriate. You wait for birthdays, for milestones, for safe moments where affection is allowed, then you say nice things in a card, in a caption, in a speech, but outside of that you keep it casual, light, safe. You make jokes instead of compliments, you tease instead of affirm, you send memes instead of "I miss you," because affection, real, clear affection, can feel too loud in everyday life. Especially between men, two lifelong friends might never say "I love you" out loud. They'll show it through favors, presence, protection, but never direct language. Because somewhere along the way, society taught them that affection without irony is weakness. But the rule applies to everyone: mothers and daughters who haven't hugged in years, siblings who haven't said anything tender since childhood, friends who talk every day but never once broke the wall to say, "I'm glad I have you." So we use placeholders: "Let's hang out soon," "Be safe," "You good." These are the cracked windows of affection, not wide open but not fully closed. And sometimes the feelings are intense, but the rule still holds. You want to say, "I still think about you," but you don't. You want to say, "I need you right now," but you wait, hoping they'll notice without you saying it. The fear is that if you say too much, you'll either scare them away, or make things weird, or give them emotional power over you. So you keep it inside. You hope your presence is enough, that they'll feel it without you needing to name it. But affection without expression leaves room for confusion. The other person might never know how much you value them, or worse, they might think you don't. So people drift apart, not because the love is gone, but because no one ever put it into words. The invisible affection rule keeps emotions private. It keeps relationships from becoming too intense, too dependent, too exposed. But it also means that people go to sleep wondering if they matter, even when they do. And when someone finally dies, you see all the words spill out. "I never told them how much they meant to me," because we wait until it's safe, until they can't hear us anymore. This rule doesn't stop you from loving people, it just stops you from telling them until it's too late. You're close with someone, a partner, a friend, a sibling, you feel like you can talk about anything. But over time, you start to notice the invisible lines. If you bring up your anxiety too often, they seem drained. If you cry more than once in a week, their patience thins. If you vent about the same problem again, they get quiet. So you start adjusting, you space out your breakdowns, you rewrite your stories to sound lighter, you preface your pain with disclaimers like, "Don't worry, I'm okay now." You test their tolerance, you measure their responses, you play the emotional boundary game. This game isn't official. No one explains the rules, but you feel them. You learn how much emotion someone is willing to handle, and you learn to stay within that range. You might talk about your sadness, but not your darkness. You might admit you're tired, but never say you feel hopeless. You might say you're stressed, but not that you're falling apart. Because when you cross that invisible threshold, the energy shifts. They become quiet, or dismissive, or try to fix it, and the moment no longer feels safe. This rule teaches you to ration your truth. You start treating your feelings like a budget. Don't overspend, don't ask too much, don't repeat yourself. Because emotional fatigue is real, and people have limits. Sometimes it's not even about intensity, it's about timing. You bring up something real and they say, "Can we not do this right now?" So you file it away. You'll try again another time, or maybe not. And here's the twist. The people who set these emotional boundaries often aren't cruel. They might be kind, supportive, even loving, but their capacity isn't infinite, and they don't always know how to hold pain that doesn't resolve quickly. So you start performing recovery. You say you're better before you are, you minimize your triggers, you tell half-truths. Also, you can remain lovable, palatable, easy to be around. This happens in relationships where one person becomes the strong one, the rock. They create safety by absorbing emotion, but they never get to express their own, because the moment they show weakness, the balance feels threatened. The game can go the other way too. You're the one who avoids emotion. You flinch when someone starts crying. You feel overwhelmed when someone opens up deeply. You want to help, but you don't know how, so you change the subject, offer advice, or shut down. You don't mean to reject them, but they feel it, and next time they share less. That's how the game self-reinforces. Over time, everyone learns what's too much. And instead of honest intimacy, you get curated closeness, filtered emotions, measured timing, calculated vulnerability. The emotional boundary game protects relationships from overload, but it also prevents true connection. Because love isn't about always being okay. It's about knowing someone can handle you even when you're not. And if you don't believe they can, you start hiding. They ask you for feedback, you hesitate. You know what you want to say, but you also know how it'll land. It's too blunt, too harsh, too real, so you take a breath and soften the blow. Instead of "it's boring," you say, "it's just a little slow in parts." Instead of "you're being selfish," you say, "I just feel like maybe you weren't thinking about how that might come across." Instead of "this isn't good," you say, "I think it has potential." This is the softened criticism reflex, the automatic instinct to dilute negative feedback so it doesn't hurt, even if that means it no longer communicates the full truth. You do it with friends, colleagues, even strangers, because brutal honesty is admired in theory but punished in practice. People say they want real feedback, but when they get it, they flinch, they defend, they distance. So over time, you learn to package criticism inside compliments, the classic sandwich. "You're doing great, I just tweaked this one thing, but overall I love it." You sugarcoat, you reframe, you use gentle phrases like "just my opinion" or "take it or leave it," all to protect their feelings and your relationship. This reflex isn't fake, it's strategic. You know that truth without tact is a weapon, and once it's out, you can't take it back. But this rule has consequences. People walk away thinking they did better than they did. They misinterpret your softness as approval. They assume their work or behavior is fine when it's not. And when things go wrong later, they feel blindsided. Why didn't anyone tell me? But someone did, just not clearly enough to make it land. You might think you're helping by being nice, but sometimes kindness is cruelty in disguise because it delays the truth. It gives people false confidence. It keeps them stuck in the same loop, unaware of what's actually not working. This rule also makes feedback exhausting. You spend more energy figuring out how to say it than actually saying it. You become a translator, decoding your own thoughts into something emotionally safe. Sometimes the softening is unintentional, it's instinct. You were raised to be polite, to avoid hurting people, to make things sound gentle even when the message is sharp. So now you can't even say "I don't like it" without adding 5 qualifiers to make it sound less offensive. And yet the irony is this: some of the strongest relationships are built on clean, direct honesty. Not cruelty, but clarity. The ability to say, "Here, S what I think, and I trust you can handle it." But that takes trust and courage and time. Until then, the softened criticism reflex stays in place. Not because you don't care, but because you care just enough to avoid the moment when someone's face drops and you realize you went too far. So you err on the side of comfort, even if that means people never hear what they truly need to. You give because you want to. You help someone move, cover their shift, lend them money, listen to their breakup story at 2 a.m. and you mean it at the time. You don't say, "Now you owe me." You don't keep a tally out loud, but somewhere, quietly, a mental log is created. Then weeks later, you need help. Maybe you need support. Maybe you just need someone to show up the way you did. But they're unavailable, they forget, they cancel, they don't come through. And suddenly something shifts, not just disappointment, betrayal. You start thinking things like, "After everything I did for you." That's pseudo-reciprocity, the social rule where we act like our generosity is unconditional, but deep down, we expect something in return. Not always the same thing, not immediately, and not explicitly, but we expect a form of balance. You say, I don't expect anything back, but you feel something when they don't return the energy, because it's not about transactions, it's about emotional fairness, about feeling valued. This rule is tricky because it's rarely spoken. If you said, I helped you so now help me, it would sound manipulative, so you don't. You play the role of the generous friend, the supportive partner, the team player, and hope the effort is remembered. But when it's not, the disappointment feels bigger than it should, because it's not just about that moment, it's about a history of quiet giving, all the things you did without asking that now feel invisible. And you start to wonder, was I giving or was I investing? This shows up in relationships where one person is always the helper. They're always there, always listening, always available, but when they need help, the room goes silent, and they don't say anything, but inside, the math is being done. And resentment builds, quietly, because it's hard to admit you feel owed, especially when you never made that part of the deal. You tell yourself, I helped because I care, but then why does it sting when they don't return it? Pseudo-reciprocity blurs the line between generosity and expectation. You want to be the person who gives freely, but you also want to feel like your giving matters, that it's seen, that it's part of a mutual loop, not a one-sided performance. The danger is this: people don't know they're letting you down because you never told them you expected anything. You smiled, said of course, said no worries, and now they're confused why you've gone distant. Because the rule was never spoken, but it was real. Pseudo-reciprocity creates a culture where people give silently, wait patiently, and then disappear quietly when their needs aren't met. And no one talks about what actually happened. You're in a group chat, someone says something questionable, maybe it's offensive, maybe it's unfair, maybe it's just clearly wrong, you disagree strongly, but instead of speaking up, you stay quiet, or worse, you drop a laughing emoji to keep things light. Why? Because the group vibe matters more than the individual truth. This is group harmony priority, the rule that says, maintaining the collective peace is more important than expressing individual discomfort, disagreement, or dissent. You don't call out the person who dominates every conversation. You don't correct the one who always takes credit. You don't confront the passive-aggressive comments from the one who hides behind humor, because if you do, you ruin the flow. You break the balance. You become the one who made it weird. So instead, you play your role, you smooth things over, you redirect, you downplay, you sacrifice accuracy for agreement, you trade honesty for peace. This rule is powerful in friend groups, families, offices, even online communities. There's always a dominant tone, chill, funny, edgy, sensitive, and everyone learns to match it. If you don't, you stand out, and standing out means risking exclusion. Because group dynamics aren't built on truth, they're built on rhythm, on shared language, shared reactions, shared silences. You learn what not to say, what not to question, which topics are off limits, which opinions get you side-eyed, and over time you adapt, not out of fear but out of rhythm. The group moves a certain way and you adjust your steps. You know how it works. The moment someone says, actually I don't agree with that, the energy dips. People get quiet, someone jokes to break the tension, someone changes the subject, and the message is clear: don't do that again. And so the loudest voice wins, not because they're right, but because no one else wants to be the disruption. Group harmony priority creates emotional choreography. Everyone senses the limits and they dance around them. But here's the cost: real connection gets replaced with consensus. People suppress opinions, filter reactions, edit themselves, and the group starts to feel good but not honest. It's why some people feel lonelier in groups than when they're alone. Because they're not there as themselves, they're there as their socially acceptable version. The rule rewards smoothness, but it punishes depth. You don't get conflict, but you don't get clarity either. And eventually, the group becomes a system of unspoken agreements, where everyone is smiling and no one is saying what they really mean. You knew the truth for a while, that the relationship was over, that the project wasn't working, that the friend was draining you, but you didn't say it, not out loud, not at first. You waited for a moment that would make it easier, softer, less confrontational. This is the delayed truth pattern, the social tendency to postpone difficult truths until the timing feels more right, even if that means being dishonest in the meantime. You tell yourself you're being kind, that you're waiting for a better moment, that you don't want to hurt anyone, but what you're really doing is avoiding the discomfort, yours and theirs. You delay the conversation because once it's spoken, it becomes real, irreversible. So you pretend you stay in the relationship even though you're emotionally checked out. You keep showing up to meetings while mentally planning your exit. You laugh at your friends' stories even though you resent them, and they don't know because you haven't said anything. Yet. But you're not lying, not exactly. You're just performing a version of the truth that's easier for everyone to live with, for now. You leave little clues, shorter replies, subtle distance, less enthusiasm. You assume they'll pick up on it, that they'll sense something's wrong, but they don't, or they do, but they don't want to ask, so the silence grows. And by the time you finally say it, I can't do this anymore, I'm not happy, this isn't working, it sounds sudden, even cruel. But to you, it's not sudden. You've lived with that sentence in your head for weeks, months, maybe longer. You just couldn't bring yourself to say it until the weight of silence was heavier than the pain of honesty. And sometimes you wait too long. You delay the truth past the point of usefulness. You stay in the wrong situation until it rots, and by the time you leave, there's nothing left to preserve. This pattern exists because truth is rarely neutral. It breaks expectations, it creates conflict, it changes dynamics, and most people are raised to avoid those things. So instead, we choose soft lies and half-truths. We smile while planning an exit. We say, I'm fine, while slowly withdrawing. We don't lie directly, we just keep postponing the moment that would make the lie collapse. And ironically, when you do finally tell the truth, people often respond with anger, not because of what you said, but because you waited so long to say it. The delay becomes the betrayal. Delayed truth feels like mercy, but sometimes it's just fear in disguise. Because if you really respected them, you detrust them with the real story when it mattered. You're in the room, you have a thought, an objection, a question, something inside you tugs, say something, but you don't. You look at who's speaking. You measure the tone of the room, you read the faces, and you stay quiet. Not because you agree, not because you're confused, but because you've been trained, maybe not formally, but socially, to keep your voice inside when it might disrupt authority, structure, or hierarchy. This is obedient silence, the internalized rule that says, if the person in charge is speaking, it's safer not to challenge them. It begins early, in classrooms where asking the wrong question earns an eye roll from the teacher, at the dinner table where disagreeing with a parent leads to tension, in offices where speaking up in front of a boss can brand you as difficult. So you learn when to be quiet, when to smile and nod, when to wait until the meeting ends and send a polite email instead. You learn that silence feels safer than interruption, that politeness is rewarded more than disruption. And sometimes it's not even fear, it's instinct. The moment you disagree, your stomach tightens, your throat feels dry. You rehearse the sentence 3 times in your head, then the moment passes and you say nothing. Because the social math doesn't add up in your favor. This rule isn't just about power, it's about perception. If you speak up too often, you're combative. If you don't speak at all, you're passive. So you try to find the middle ground, small, non-threatening contributions, slightly reworded agreements, carefully timed questions that don't challenge the core. But this comes at a cost. You stop bringing your full voice, you filter your instincts, you water down your intelligence, and the worst part, no one knows. To them, you're quiet, reserved, agreeable. They don't see the war happening inside your head between truth and safety. Obedient silence is why bad ideas survive in teams, why toxic dynamics go unchallenged in families, why injustice repeats in institutions, because everyone feels it, but no one says it, not first. And when someone does break the silence, it often comes with risk. They get labeled, frozen out, or quietly punished, so the rule survives. But silence isn't always neutral. Sometimes it's complicity, sometimes it's abandonment, sometimes it's betrayal, not of them, but of yourself. And if you obey too long, you start to lose touch with your own courage, until eventually your silence doesn't come from fear, but from habit. And by then, even you forget what you were trying to say. You're in the middle of saying something, a story, a joke, a strong opinion, but halfway through you pause, you hear your own voice from the outside, you imagine how it might land. Will they laugh? Will they judge? Will they twist your words? So instead of finishing, you pull back, you change the subject. You end with, well, never mind. This is the self-censorship reflex, the internal mechanism that edits your expression in real time to avoid conflict, judgment, or vulnerability. It's not someone else silencing you, it's you preemptively silencing yourself. You start filtering language, avoiding strong words, dulling down emotion, not because you want to, but because you've learned what happens when you don't. You've been called too intense, too dramatic, too serious, too much. You've seen how people look when you're too passionate, how they laugh uncomfortably when you bring up something deep, how they go quiet when you talk about something controversial, so you adapt. Now you test the room before you speak. You soften every opinion with qualifiers like, I could be wrong, but, or this is just my personal take. You pre-edit everything before it leaves your mouth. You might have entire conversations in your head, versions where you said exactly what you wanted, but in real life, you only share the safe version. And most people don't notice, because your performance is smooth. You seem polite, open-minded, balanced, but inside you're holding back. You're splitting off parts of yourself to keep things socially acceptable. This reflex doesn't just affect what you say, it affects how you think. Over time, you start second-guessing your own instincts. You wonder if your reactions are too much, if your perspective is flawed, if your truth is even worth saying. And in that doubt, silence becomes your default. It happens in relationships too. You don't tell your partner when something hurts you. You don't tell your friend when something feels off. You don't tell your parent when something from childhood still lingers. Because you've learned that speaking up doesn't always lead to resolution, sometimes it just leads to distance. So you stay quiet, you pretend you're fine, you rehearse truth and deliver politeness. This reflex becomes most powerful when tied to identity. If you've ever been mocked for your accent, your background, your body, your trauma, you learn to hide those parts. You speak in neutral tones, you edit yourself to fit. And it works, you get through the conversation, you avoid the stares, you keep the room comfortable. But it doesn't feel like you, it feels like a version of you built for survival. Self-censorship feels like control, but it's also a kind of self-erasure. Each time you filter your truth, you lose a piece of your own clarity. And over time, you start asking yourself, how much of what I say is really mine, and how much is just me trying not to make waves? You decide to open up. You say something vulnerable about your past, your fears, your inner world, but it's curated, selected, a story that sounds intimate but has been rehearsed, a confession that's real but emotionally safe. This is controlled transparency, the ability to appear open while still keeping your true self guarded. You share, but only what you've already made peace with. You reveal, but only what won't shake your image. You're vulnerable, but only where you can control the outcome. You know how to package your pain in a way that makes you look brave, how to admit your flaws in a way that still earns you praise. I used to be a perfectionist. I struggle with overthinking. I'm too hard on myself. Truths, yes, but polished ones. It's the kind of sharing that sounds deep, but is ultimately safe, and most people don't see the difference. You use it in relationships. You open up just enough to create closeness, but not enough to feel exposed. You tell your partner about your fears, but not the ones that still control you. You talk about your past, but leave out the parts that would change how they see you. You present a version of your truth that's honest, but incomplete. It's not manipulation, it's strategy. You've learned what happens when you're too raw too early. People flinch, people run, people use your truth against you, so now you control the flow. You let people in, but only to the guest room, never the basement. You do it at work too. You tell your boss you've been struggling a bit lately, but you don't say you're burned out. You tell your team you're handling it, but you're barely sleeping. You stay in control because vulnerability at work still carries risk. In online, controlled transparency thrives. You post about your mental health, but with the right filter, the right caption. You tell people you're healing, but not that you cried on the floor last night and thought about disappearing. Because one sounds inspirational, the other sounds unstable. You become skilled at appearing real without being fully seen. And here's the strange part, people admire you for it. They call you so authentic, so brave, so honest. And you smile, but part of you knows they've only seen the approved version, the version you decided was safe. Controlled transparency is a defense mechanism wrapped in emotional intelligence. It lets you connect, but on your terms. It protects you from judgment, pity, and misuse. but it also prevents true intimacy. Because real vulnerability isn't edited, it's not impressive, it's messy, risky, alive. But that kind of truth, the unfiltered kind, is rare, because the cost is high. So instead you stay polished, selective, honest but never fully exposed. And the people around you feel close, but not quite close enough to see who you really are underneath. Someone tells you they're burnt out from work. You nod, you listen, you offer kind words, you've been there so you understand. Another friend talks about losing a parent, you slow down, get quiet, feel the weight. But then someone else shares a struggle you can't relate to. Maybe they're upset over something you'd consider small. Maybe they're reacting in a way you wouldn't. You try to stay supportive, but something in you resists. This is situational empathy, the rule that empathy is easier when we've felt something similar and harder when we haven't. We don't empathize equally, we empathize conditionally. It doesn't mean you're cruel, it means your emotional access is filtered through familiarity. You understand pain best when it matches your own. When someone describes heartbreak and you've had your heart broken, the connection is instant. You know the tone, the heaviness, the silence behind the words, but if you've never been through it, it sounds abstract. You can only imagine, and even then, your imagination might miss the mark. You don't mean to minimize, but you do. You say things like, well, at least, or try to focus on the positives. Not because you don't care, but because your frame of reference is different. You reach for comfort, but it comes out empty. Situational empathy is most obvious when you see how people respond to invisible pain, anxiety, trauma, burnout, chronic fatigue. If they've lived it, they lean in. If they haven't, they pull back. You'll hear things like, just push through, we all have bad days, or maybe you're overreacting. The rule also applies to social issues. When someone describes discrimination or marginalization, people often sort themselves into two groups, those who feel it immediately and those who treat it like an intellectual topic. Because if it's never been personal, it feels distant. The pain sounds like data, not experience. And so we divide our empathy by experience, not consciously, but instinctively. You might be deeply supportive of your friend's divorce, but dismissive of someone else's panic attack. You might show patience to someone who's grieving, but not to someone who's overwhelmed by loneliness. You don't think you're being unfair, but your ability to empathize narrows when the story doesn't match yours. And the person on the receiving end feels it. They feel the difference. When empathy is real, it's grounding. When it's situational, it's hollow. They nod and say thank you, but inside, they feel more alone than before they spoke. Situational empathy keeps us human. It allows us to care deeply for things we've known, but it also limits our compassion. Because the moment someone's pain feels unfamiliar, we stop treating it like pain and start treating it like a problem. The challenge is learning to sit with experiences you haven't lived, without rushing to fix them, reframe them, or compare them to something easier. Because real empathy doesn't require you to feel exactly the same. It just requires you to stay, even when you don't understand. They're well-dressed, clean-cut, articulate. Their voice is steady, their posture confident, their presence composed. You've just met them, but something inside you says, I trust this person. You don't have evidence, you don't know their character, but they seem trustworthy. This is aesthetic trust bias, the psychological rule that people who look competent are more likely to be believed, respected, and followed, regardless of who they actually are. We like to think we judge people on substance, their actions, their values, their ideas. But the truth is, your brain is wired to make snap decisions based on visual cues. Facial symmetry, grooming, vocal tone, body language all get processed before someone says their second sentence. If someone is conventionally attractive, your brain associates them with intelligence, kindness, strength. It's called the halo effect. One positive trait spills over into assumptions about everything else. And it's not just beauty, it's style, confidence, tone, the aesthetic of reliability. A man in a suit is taken more seriously than a man in a hoodie, even if the man in the hoodie built the software running the company. A woman who speaks calmly and dresses sharply is seen as professional, even if she's saying something incorrect. Meanwhile, someone who stumbles over their words or dresses unconventionally has to work twice as hard to be taken seriously. The bias gets stronger with authority. A doctor who looks the part is trusted more. A leader who speaks like a TED Talk is assumed to be competent, even when their content is vague. In courtrooms, juries are more likely to trust good-looking defendants. In job interviews, managers often click with candidates who present well, even if their skills are average. We don't admit it, but we do it. And it creates unfair dynamics. People with less polished presentation are constantly overlooked, underestimated, or patronized. Their ideas are questioned more. Their voices get interrupted. They're told to clean up, speak better, be more confident, not because they lack intelligence, but because they don't trigger that aesthetic shortcut. Meanwhile, people who do look the part often get away with more. They're given the benefit of the doubt. Their mistakes are framed as exceptions. Their confidence is mistaken for competence. And over time, the bias reinforces itself. Those who are trusted are encouraged. Those who are not are ignored, and trust becomes less about truth and more about the surface. Aesthetic trust bias affects how we hire, how we vote, who we follow, who we date. It makes us loyal to image, not integrity. And the worst part, the person you trust most might just be the one who's best at looking like they deserve it. Because the human brain doesn't ask, is this true? It asks, does this look right? You're in a group conversation. Everyone's contributing, joking, sharing stories, giving opinions. On the surface, it feels equal. Everyone gets to speak. Everyone is heard. But as the conversation goes on, patterns emerge. One person leads, another follows. One opinion gets echoed, another gets ignored. Some people hold back, others dominate. Still, no one says anything, because technically everyone could speak up. That's what makes it feel equal. This is the pseudo-equality norm, the social illusion that just because everyone has the same opportunity to speak, they have the same power in the space. It's equality by structure, but not by experience. In theory, the room is fair. In practice, it's shaped by unspoken hierarchies: who's louder, who's more liked, who's more confident, who's more intimidating. So even though no one's silenced, not everyone feels safe to speak freely. You've felt it before. You're in a discussion, you have something to say, but the dominant voice in the room makes you hesitate. You second-guess your phrasing. You wonder if your take will land wrong. By the time you've decided, the moment has passed. And if you're someone who usually gets heard, it's easy to miss. You assume the space is open because you feel comfortable in it, but comfort isn't equally distributed. Some people have to earn every word, others just speak. This shows up in classrooms, meetings, family dinners, friend groups. There's a default rhythm, and those who don't match it fall behind. If you're slower to process, if your voice is softer, if your opinion is unpopular, the silence swallows you. And no one notices because you had the chance. That's the trap. The appearance of equality becomes the excuse not to question deeper imbalance. People tell women to just speak up more. They tell introverts to jump in quicker. They tell minorities, juniors, outsiders, the table is open. But the table isn't neutral. It's shaped by years of who's been listened to and who's been dismissed, who gets to interrupt without consequence, who gets taken seriously without proof. So people adapt, they stop trying, or they learn to speak in a certain way, less direct, less emotional, less threatening. They try to fit the mold of what's considered reasonable, not because they lack clarity, but because they know how the game is played. And still, the group believes it's fair, because anyone could have said something. Pseudo-equality is the perfect social camouflage. It makes everyone feel good about the dynamic while preserving invisible power structures. The only way to break the illusion is to pay attention to who isn't speaking and ask why. Not performatively, not once in a while, but consistently. Because true equality doesn't just give people a seat, it gives them room to breathe in it. You talk every day, you know their favorite shows, their ex's name, what they had for lunch. You text good morning, good night, you joke, you vent, you share random life updates. To anyone watching, it looks close, tight, connected, but something's missing. This is surface-level intimacy, the social phenomenon where a relationship appears emotionally deep because of frequency and familiarity, but never actually touches the core. You're in constant contact, but you're not in real connection. You talk about plans, gossip, pop culture, work drama, food, even old memories, but you rarely talk about fear, about insecurity, about the patterns that keep repeating in your life, about what hurts and why. You don't ask questions that leave people quiet. You don't stay long in emotional discomfort. You keep things moving. And it feels intimate because it's consistent, but consistency isn't depth. This kind of connection happens in many friendships, even long-term ones. You can know someone for years and still not know how they really feel when they're alone. You know what makes them laugh, but not what keeps them up at night. You know how they act, not who they are under the surface. Surface-level intimacy thrives on shared routine. The good morning text, the 10-minute phone call, the shared memes, it creates rhythm, and rhythm creates safety, but safety doesn't always lead to truth. There's a reason you avoid going deeper. Sometimes it's because you don't want to disturb the balance. The relationship works, it feels good. Why risk complicating it with heaviness? Other times you've tried, you brought up something real, something raw, and it got dismissed, or changed the mood, or wasn't met with the care you needed, so you went back to safe ground, light talk, predictable reactions. The illusion is mutual. They probably think you're close too, because closeness is being measured by frequency, not depth. But if you disappeared tomorrow, how much of your truth would be left unsaid? This shows up in dating too. You're always in contact. You share playlists, pictures, plans, but when you bring up childhood trauma, attachment, emotional needs, they freeze or minimize or brush past it. So you adapt, you keep it fun, you keep it light. And slowly the relationship becomes a performance of closeness instead of the real thing. Even in friendships, people confuse inside jokes with insight. Just because you laugh together doesn't mean you know each other. Real intimacy comes from being seen, not just observed, from hearing things you don't know how to respond to and staying anyway, from asking, "Is that really what you feel?" and sitting with the silence that follows. But most people don't want that, not all the time. They want comfort, not excavation. And so surface-level intimacy becomes the norm. It's smooth, it's warm, it's easy to maintain. But eventually you hit a moment of crisis, a loss, a betrayal, a breakdown, and you realize the connection can't hold weight. The conversation stops. The silence gets awkward, because the depth was never there, just the pattern. And then you ask yourself, did I ever really know them? Did they ever really know me? And sometimes the answer is no. You're mid-argument with someone, they say something that hits too close. Maybe they're right, maybe they're not, either way you feel it. But instead of responding vulnerably, instead of saying that actually hurt, or you might be right, you double down, you defend yourself, you rationalize, you twist their words, not because you believe you're right, but because you need to protect how you're seen. This is the image preservation instinct, the psychological reflex to protect your social identity at all costs, even if that means sacrificing truth, clarity, or connection. You're not just fighting for the point, you're fighting to not look weak, not look foolish, not look small. That instinct takes over without you realizing. It rewrites your tone, it stiffens your body, it turns conversations into performances. You do it in more subtle ways too. You admit to small flaws that sound humble, but avoid the real ones that make you feel exposed. You say things like, "I overthink sometimes," but never admit you spiral in silence. You say, "I'm bad at texting," instead of "I pull away when I feel unwanted." You curate vulnerability to preserve image, because being seen in a certain way feels like survival. This instinct isn't vanity, it's protection. The way you're perceived has real consequences, in relationships, in work, in social status, and once your image takes a hit, it's hard to recover, so you manage it carefully, constantly. You edit your reactions in real time. You don't ask certain questions because you don't want to seem needy. You don't express certain doubts because you don't want to seem insecure. You don't cry when you want to because you know what that looks like to certain people. You know the power of perception, and you adapt to survive it. In dating, this instinct shows up as posturing, pretending you're less invested than you are, acting like you don't care, waiting longer to respond so you don't seem desperate, not because you're detached, but because the image of detachment has value. It gives you power, or at least the illusion of it. In friendships, it shows up as forced competence. You pretend you're doing fine, even when you're not, because you want to be seen as the strong one, the stable one, the one who's always got it together. In work, it shows up as silence. You don't ask questions in meetings because you don't want to look uninformed. You don't admit when you're lost because you've built a reputation of being sharp, and once people see a crack, they'll treat you differently. The image preservation instinct makes you careful, calculated, controlled, and it works for a while. But it also builds a wall between you and everyone else. Because if you never let the image break, no one gets to see the human underneath. And connection, real connection, only happens when something unpolished slips through. The people who really know you are the ones who have seen you lose the image, who have seen you when you weren't composed, weren't clever, weren't likable, just raw. But for many people, that kind of exposure is terrifying, so they stay in performance mode, always shaping, always protecting. The irony, the more tightly you hold the image, the more fragile it becomes. One misstep and it shatters. And sometimes, all it would take to build something real is to say, yeah, I was wrong, or I don't know what I'm doing, or that made me feel small. But the instinct says, don't give them that so you don't. You feel the tears building in your eyes, but you swallow them. You clench your jaw, shift your focus, take a deep breath. Not here, not now. You wait until you're alone, in a car, in a bathroom, in the shower. That's where the emotions are allowed to exist. This is public vulnerability suppression, the deeply ingrained rule that certain emotions should only be expressed in private. That crying, breaking down, or visibly struggling in front of others is a breach of social decorum. You've been taught it from an early age. Don't cry in front of people. Be strong, hold it together. And those phrases weren't just advice, they were warnings. Because once you show vulnerability in public, you lose control of the narrative. You risk being judged, pitied, misunderstood. So you hide it, you train your body to delay emotional expression. You get good at blinking tears back, smiling through pain, saying, I'm fine, in a tone that sounds convincing. And society reinforces this. You're praised for composure, for keeping cool under pressure, for not making others uncomfortable with your sadness. You're called strong, but what they often mean is silent. Public vulnerability suppression isn't just about crying, it's about any emotional display that challenges the norm of control. Shaking hands, angry outbursts, voice cracking during a speech, breaking into tears during a presentation. Even joy, if it's too loud, too unfiltered, makes people uneasy. You learn to tone yourself down in public spaces, to cry silently, to smile in apology after expressing frustration, to package grief into something elegant, because the raw version makes people look away. This suppression is especially strong for men who are taught that emotion equals weakness. But women feel it too, told not to be too sensitive, not to be emotional in meetings, not to cry or they'll be dismissed. So everyone learns, vulnerability is allowed, but only behind closed doors. You see someone crying in public and your first instinct isn't concern, it's discomfort. You don't know what to do, you avoid eye contact, you give space, not because they asked for it, but because you're trying to escape the intimacy of their pain. And when you break the rule, when you cry at work, or in front of strangers, or during a conversation that suddenly breaks you open, the shame comes fast. You apologize, you say, I don't know why I'm doing this. You try to pull it back. Because you know what it looks like, messy, dramatic, weak. Even though the truth is, everyone feels this way sometimes. Everyone breaks. Everyone reaches that moment where the performance cracks, but we've created a culture where emotional control is rewarded, and public vulnerability is seen as loss of control. So we suppress, and then wonder why everyone seems so put together while we're falling apart inside. The cost of this rule is high. It creates isolation, even in community. People feel like they're the only ones struggling, the only ones breaking behind the scenes, because all they see is the highlight reel, not the breakdowns that happen quietly in parking lots, bathroom stalls, or text messages that start with, "Can I call you?" But sometimes, vulnerability in public is exactly what people need to see, to remember they're not alone, to remember that being human doesn't require secrecy. It's hard to break the rule, but when someone does, when they cry and don't apologize, when they speak from pain without softening it, it creates space. It gives permission. It reminds people that public doesn't have to mean perfect. And maybe, just maybe, we'd all feel less alone if more of us stopped hiding the parts that make us real. You're in a new group, a classroom, a workplace, a party. You don't know everyone, but you quickly pick up the tone. People joke a certain way, talk about certain topics, dress with a particular vibe. You scan, you absorb, you adjust. You weren't told how to behave. No one handed you a rule book, but still, you align. This is default conformity bias, the subconscious tendency to adopt the behaviors, opinions, or tones of the group you're in, not because you believe in them, but because the alternative is standing out. And standing out feels dangerous. You laugh at a joke you don't find funny. You nod at an opinion you don't share. You avoid mentioning something you love because no one else seems to. You're not trying to fake anything. You're trying to belong. And you don't even notice you're doing it because it happens fast. micro-adjustments, shifts in tone, silence where there should have been a reaction, all of it shaped by the desire to not be the one who disrupts the flow. This shows up in offices where everyone agrees with the manager, even when the idea is clearly flawed. In friend groups where everyone listens to the same music, watches the same shows, repeats the same jokes. In online spaces where disagreement feels like a threat to your status. People become mirrors, they reflect what's around them, because it's safer than showing a version of themselves that might not fit. And when someone does go against the grain, everyone feels it. The silence stretches, the tension rises, someone makes a joke to bring the group back into alignment. The message is clear, that kind of difference isn't welcome here. Default conformity bias isn't always about big ideas. Sometimes it's about posture, word choice, clothing, how loud you laugh, how much eye contact you make. These are signals constantly calibrated to match the environment, not consciously, just instinctively. You learn early, as a kid, if you like something no one else did, you got weird looks. As a teen, if your music or clothes were different, you got labeled. As an adult, if your opinions don't match the cultural current, you get left out of certain rooms. So you evolve, you learn to read rooms faster than you read people. You learn that blending in keeps things smooth. You don't get challenged, you don't get questioned, you just move with the group. But over time, you start forgetting what was you and what was adaptation. You lose track of whether you actually believe the things you say or if they've just become your script. You start to feel hollow in rooms full of people, because your presence isn't you, it's your alignment. And yet, breaking that pattern feels almost impossible, because every time you speak an unpopular truth, you risk social friction. You feel the cost immediately, in the pause, in the looks, in the withdrawal. So most people choose conformity not because they're weak, but because they're tired. But the price of constant alignment is quiet resentment. You resent yourself for holding back. You resent others for not noticing. You resent the performance that never ends. And eventually, you stop showing up fully, not because you're lost, but because you've been edited down to what the room expects. Default conformity bias keeps groups stable, but it slowly dissolves identity, one silent nod at a time. You're in a conversation with someone older, more experienced, more respected. They say something maybe questionable, maybe outdated, maybe flat out wrong, but you don't correct them, you don't challenge them. You say, "Interesting point," you nod, you let it pass. Not because you agree, but because they're in a position that makes disagreement feel disrespectful. This is the authority-respect illusion, the psychological reflex to treat someone's authority as truth, even when it isn't, simply because questioning them feels socially or emotionally dangerous. It's deeply ingrained. You learned it as a child. Don't interrupt adults. Don't question teachers. Don't challenge your boss. And even now, those rules stay in your tone, in your language, in the hesitation before you speak. You've been in rooms where someone in charge dominates the conversation with confidence, not accuracy. You hear them misstate facts, oversimplify problems, offer flawed logic, but no one says a word. Everyone nods. Someone says, "Exactly." Why? Because challenging someone with status feels like stepping out of place, like disrupting a social order that protects everyone's roles. This doesn't just apply to formal authority, managers, professors, leaders. It applies to emotional authority, that friend everyone looks to, that parent who's always right, that colleague who has seniority. Their presence carries weight, and people adjust their truth to keep things respectful. You find yourself softening disagreement. "I see what you mean, but maybe just another way to look at it." You dilute your point so it doesn't feel like rebellion. And sometimes you don't speak up at all, because experience has taught you that questioning authority doesn't end in dialogue, it ends in discomfort, awkwardness, retaliation, maybe even punishment. So you let it go, you protect the dynamic, even if it means betraying your insight. Authority respect illusion is especially dangerous when the person in power is wrong but confident, because confidence triggers trust. The room aligns, the falsehood spreads, and no one wants to be the first to say, "Wait, that doesn't sound right." The illusion also protects fragile egos. People in authority often get used to being right, or at least treated like they are. So when someone does challenge them, they react poorly. Defensiveness, dismissal, coldness, and everyone else sees it and learns the lesson: don't be the next one. This is how bad systems persist, not because no one sees the flaws, but because no one wants to be the one who disrupts the illusion. And it's not just fear. Sometimes it's admiration. You respect this person, they've done good work, they've helped you. So you hesitate to challenge them not because they're right, but because you feel like disagreeing would be disloyal. But respect and silence are not the same. You can honor someone's history while still holding them accountable to truth. You can value someone's insight while still questioning their claims. The illusion tells you that disagreement is disrespect, but the reality is sometimes silence is. Because if the people with clarity don't speak up, the people with power never hear the truth. You're in a group setting, the conversation is flowing, opinions are being shared, and suddenly someone makes a bold statement, one you don't entirely agree with. You pause, look around. Everyone else nods, laughs, agrees out loud. No one seems to question it. You feel the pressure. So you nod too. Not because you've changed your mind, but because the group already decided what the correct response is. This is collective agreement pressure, the psychological force that compels individuals to align with the perceived majority, even when their internal stance differs. It's not always about being liked. Sometimes it's just about not being othered, not being the one who slows down the flow, the one who disrupts the vibe. You sense that pushing back, even gently, would shift the energy of the group, and no one likes that person. So you do what's easiest, you agree, or you stay quiet, which in effect is agreement. This happens in classrooms, where a popular student voices an opinion and the rest follow. In workplaces, where no one wants to be the one who questions the team lead. In friend groups, where one dominant voice sets the tone and others follow to preserve harmony. Sometimes it's not even verbal. It's in facial expressions, body language, microreactions. A raised eyebrow can shut down a thought before it's said. A collective laugh can smother dissent. And the moment you sense that the group is moving in one direction, your brain calculates, is it worth it to oppose this? Most of the time, the answer is no. Even if you're confident, even if you're right, because the cost of group disruption often outweighs the benefit of being true to yourself in that moment. This creates a ripple effect. People stop offering real thoughts. They filter themselves based on what they believe will land, not what they believe is true. And the group becomes an echo chamber. It feels like agreement, but it's really submission. No one knows where the original idea came from, but everyone nods now. And the more people nod, the harder it becomes for anyone to raise a hand and say, "Actually, I don't see it that way." And when someone finally does, the room shifts. There's a pause, a recalibration. People look around to see how others are reacting. The brave voice is met with resistance, confusion, or a kind of social silence that says, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." But sometimes that one voice breaks the spell. Others start speaking up. Disagreement enters the room not as conflict but as air, and the group breathes again. Because collective agreement pressure doesn't create connection, it creates illusion. Everyone feels together, but no one feels seen. True consensus doesn't require conformity, it requires freedom. But most groups don't have the patience for that, so they nod and keep moving. You post the right message, you like the right comment, you add the correct disclaimer in your story. You say the socially accepted phrase in a conversation, not because you feel strongly about it, but because not saying it would make you look wrong. This is moral virtue signaling, the behavioral instinct to publicly align with the most accepted or moral position in a group, often as a way to signal personal goodness, awareness, or belonging, regardless of personal conviction. It doesn't always mean you're being fake. Sometimes you really do care, but the delivery becomes a performance, a way to communicate not just what you believe, but who you are in the eyes of others. You're not just sharing a cause, you're sharing yourself as the kind of person who stands for the right thing. This happens everywhere, in politics, in culture, in social media trends. You see people amplifying slogans, retweeting outrage, denouncing the latest controversy, all with speed and certainty. The tone is loud, absolute, morally clean, and underneath it all the subtext is, "Look, I'm one of the good ones." And in a way it works. These signals are currency. They buy you approval, likes, retweets, belonging. You don't have to build deep arguments, you just have to be on the correct side. But over time, something shifts. People stop checking whether they believe in what they're saying, they only check whether they're saying what people expect. So the discourse becomes hollow, loud, performative. Moral virtue signaling thrives in public spaces where image matters. People post about injustices they don't understand, repeat slogans they haven't researched, perform empathy they don't feel, all because silence feels like complicity and nuance feels like betrayal. You feel pressure to say something, anything, even if you're not ready, because being slow to speak starts to look like indifference. So people choose speed over substance, certainty over curiosity, performance over process. This creates a strange phenomenon, performative purity. Everyone sounds perfect, sharp, aligned, no messiness, no self-doubt, no growth, just declarations. And that's dangerous, because it punishes real conversation. It scares people away from asking questions. It makes people afraid to admit, I don't know enough about this yet, or I'm still learning, or I see both sides. It turns morality into a branding exercise. And those who genuinely care start to feel exhausted. They want to do the work, not just say the words, but the volume of performance around them drowns out the quiet truth. Caring deeply isn't loud. Sometimes the people who say the least are doing the most, and sometimes the loudest voices are broadcasting not their beliefs, but their fear of being seen as bad. Moral virtue signaling gives people safety in numbers, but it can also replace sincerity with strategy. And if everyone's speaking to be sane, who's still speaking to be real? You're talking to a friend, you open up just a little. You mention that work has been hard, you're not sleeping, you're feeling off, you pause, wait, and then they mirror you, they say, yeah, same, honestly, I've been feeling the same lately. That moment of mirrored vulnerability, that's not random. That's the unwritten rule of reciprocal emotion exchange. You give a little, I give a little. You open up, I match you, but if I don't match you, you feel exposed, or worse, rejected. It's why most people don't start with deep vulnerability. It's a test. You reveal a mild truth about yourself and you wait to see what they give back. If they stay on the surface, you retreat. If they open back up, the door stays open. But no one says this out loud. It's all subconscious. We feel it in the rhythm of conversation, in the tone, in how much someone gives us back. Even silence becomes meaningful. If you say, I've been feeling kind of depressed lately, and they say, ah man, that sucks, and then move on, you close back up. You learn this isn't safe ground. But if they say, yeah, I've been feeling that too, suddenly the air feels different. You're not alone, you're matched. This rule governs how most friendships deepen or stagnate. Every real friendship is built on the gradual escalation of shared emotion. You don't start by crying. You start by admitting you're tired. You don't start by revealing your childhood trauma. You start by saying, lately I feel a bit off. But each step is a bid, a risk, and whether the relationship grows or not depends on the match, the reciprocity. We don't just want to be heard, we want to be reflected. This rule is especially strong in early dating. If you share a story that's personal and your date responds with surface-level commentary, it doesn't matter how attractive they are, something breaks. Emotional trust doesn't build. And if you try again and get the same mismatch, you begin to distance, even if the person did nothing wrong. And it goes both ways. If someone tells you something deep and you don't meet them there, they'll feel it. They might laugh it off, but they'll remember. That gap will live in their body as discomfort. This is why emotionally intelligent people navigate this rule constantly. They monitor tone, depth, timing. They know that going too deep too soon, without reciprocity, makes others uncomfortable. They also know that withholding emotion in the face of vulnerability is a form of rejection. Reciprocal emotion exchange is not about fake empathy, it's about matching weight. If someone shares a small anxiety, you don't need to unload your trauma, but you do need to meet them with something real, something parallel, that says, I'm here too. Failing to do this doesn't just limit connection, it teaches people that emotional expression is unsafe, that their honesty isn't welcome, and eventually they stop trying. Relationships become quiet, polite, empty. So when someone gives you a piece of their real self, it's not just a story, it's a question, will you meet me here? And how you answer decides what the relationship becomes. You're at a dinner table with friends, the food is okay, one dish is clearly undercooked. You glance around, no one says a word, the host asks, is everything all right? Everyone smiles, nods, one person even says, delicious, but it's not, and you all know it. This is hidden agenda politeness, the unwritten rule that sometimes we lie with kindness to protect relationships, status, or image, not because we're fake, but because truth is too dangerous, too awkward, too expensive. You compliment the haircut you secretly dislike, you laugh at the joke that didn't land, You thank someone for a gift you'll never use, not because you're trying to manipulate them, but because telling the truth would rupture the surface harmony. And you don't want to carry that. Hidden agenda politeness shows up everywhere. At work, when you pretend to agree with a decision so you don't look difficult. In family settings, when you nod along to avoid reigniting an old argument. In friendships, when you say, "We should totally hang out soon," knowing you won't follow through. These aren't big lies, but they're not small either. They're social grease, the lubricant that keeps the machine of civility running. This rule becomes even more intense in high-stakes relationships. You downplay your frustration with a partner's behavior because you're scared it'll start a fight. You hold back your real opinion about your boss because you need your job. You let someone think they're impressing you because calling out their performance would make you look cruel. And so you perform politeness not as a virtue, but as a strategy. It doesn't mean you're dishonest. It means you're choosing stability over confrontation. But over time, this has consequences, because hidden agenda politeness builds a false version of you in someone else's mind. They think you like something you don't. They think you're okay with something that hurt. They think everything's fine because you smiled and said it's all good. And one day they'll find out the truth and be shocked. They'll say, "Why didn't you tell me?" And you won't have an answer that satisfies them. This is where resentment grows. You protected them from the truth, but now you resent them for not seeing it. And that's the hidden cost of this politeness. You trade short-term comfort for long-term disconnection. It also teaches people the wrong thing. If someone keeps making jokes that bother you and you keep laughing politely, they think it's working. You reinforce the behavior. If someone oversteps your boundaries and you smile through it, they believe those boundaries don't exist. Politeness isn't neutral, it's a form of teaching. You're showing people what's acceptable, even when it's not. This doesn't mean you should start being brutally honest. That's not the answer either. The rule exists for a reason, because raw truth can cause unnecessary pain, but it means being more aware of why you're being polite. Are you protecting someone else or avoiding discomfort for yourself? Are you preserving harmony or avoiding accountability? There's a difference between kindness and performance. One connects, the other protects. And the more you perform, the less you're seen. You've probably had this moment. You're laughing with a friend, exchanging messages, tagging each other in memes, but somewhere in the quiet part of your mind you wonder, would we still talk if I stopped initiating? That's the performance loop. The idea that the friendship continues not because it naturally thrives, but because you're maintaining it like a job, like a role. You check in because it's expected. You act warm because that's the script. You remember birthdays, respond with emojis, send little updates, not always because you want to, but because the performance has to be upheld. And if you stop, silent. This rule is brutal because it hides behind the illusion of closeness. On the surface, everything looks fine, but underneath there's a haunting question. If I stopped performing friend, would I still be one? And often the answer is no. The friendship performance loop isn't about lying or faking love. It's about momentum, social inertia. You act as a friend out of habit, and so do they. You joke, reply, react, but rarely ask why. And over time, you start to forget if there's any real connection left. You start to fear that your role in their life is conditional, based on effort, tone, or presence. You can test it, let a few days go by without saying anything, then weeks, then longer, and sometimes no one notices, no one checks in, and now you're not just feeling distance, you're questioning whether the friendship was ever real or just a shared loop of polite loyalty. This rule is strongest in long-term friendships where time has replaced depth. You don't talk about anything real anymore, but you still tag them in old inside jokes. You don't feel safe sharing your real problems, but you show up at their events. The structure remains, but the substance is gone. And this creates a haunting kind of guilt, because you don't want to lose them, but you don't want to keep pretending either. So you stay in the loop, smile, perform, hit the right notes, because the alternative, confronting the drift, feels too heavy. But the truth is, every real friendship can handle a pause, a silence, a drop in effort. Real connection survives without constant performance, but performance-based friendships die the second you stop clapping. And that's what makes this rule so emotionally dangerous. It traps you in a cycle of fake effort, afraid that if you stop playing the role, the entire relationship vanishes. Not because you did something wrong, but because there was nothing real holding it up to begin with. You're at work and someone you barely talk to suddenly offers to help you with a difficult task. They smile a little too much, insist they love helping out, and you sense something underneath. Maybe they're angling for a favor later. Maybe they want visibility, or maybe they're trying to reset your opinion of them before a big meeting. You can't prove it, but you feel it. That's strategic kindness. It's the kind of kindness that looks generous on the surface but operates like a trade, a move, a social investment, and it works because we're wired to respond to kindness with trust, with softness, with lowered guard, but when the kindness comes with invisible strings, it becomes manipulation wrapped in charm. This rule shows up everywhere. The boss who compliments you more than usual before asking you to work late, the acquaintance who checks in just before asking for a recommendation, the distant cousin who suddenly wants to reconnect right before pitching you an idea. None of these acts are rude. In fact, they're often wrapped in perfect manners, but they're not clean. They're designed to shift power by making you feel you owe them something. And the worst part, it works. Strategic kindness hijacks reciprocity. You feel like a bad person if you don't return the favor. You feel selfish for doubting someone who was just trying to be nice. And so you play along, you say yes, you agree, even if something feels off. That's the power of this rule. It exploits your desire to be fair, to be gracious, to believe the best, and in doing so, it blurs the line between genuine goodness and social leverage. But not all strategic kindness is sinister. Sometimes it's survival. You smile extra wide because you want to be liked. You offer help because you want to be seen as reliable. You send a thank you gift not just because you're grateful, but because you want to maintain the relationship. These aren't evil acts, they're social tactics, and in some environments, they're necessary. The real danger isn't using strategic kindness. It's using it without awareness, without boundaries. When everything becomes a move, a calculation, a play, you lose the ability to just be kind, without expectation, without return. And on the receiving end, it's exhausting, because you can't tell who actually cares and who's just playing the game. You start doubting sincerity. You start bracing for the ask after every smile. You start withholding trust, even from people who mean it. So how do you tell the difference? Time, patterns, reactions. Genuine kindness doesn't demand. It doesn't shift tone when you say no. It doesn't vanish when you set a boundary. Strategic kindness, though, gets cold, frustrated, confused, because the exchange didn't complete. The trade failed. And that's when you realize you weren't being helped. You were being managed. You're at dinner with acquaintances and the conversation turns to relationships. Everyone's sharing funny or vulnerable stories, who cheated, who got ghosted, who still hung up on their ex. You feel the pressure to contribute, so you offer a safe detail. Yeah, I dated someone really jealous once. You don't elaborate, you don't go deep, just enough to show you're participating, but not enough to actually open up. That's controlled self-disclosure. It's the act of revealing something that feels personal, but is actually rehearsed, neutral, or non-threatening. It makes people think you're being transparent while protecting your real emotions, your real scars. You give just enough to maintain intimacy without vulnerability. This rule is everywhere. In job interviews, my biggest weakness is that I care too much. On dates, I've had a few bad experiences, but I've learned a lot. In therapy even, I think I have trust issues, but it's not a big deal. These aren't lies, but they're filters, sanitized versions of truth. Controlled self-disclosure functions as a social shield. It keeps you likable and relatable without risking rejection. It gives you the appearance of openness, which builds trust, while keeping your deepest fears or traumas locked away. And most people don't even know they're doing it. It becomes instinct. You feel a question coming, and you already know what version of the answer you're going to give. And there's a reason this rule exists. We're punished for raw honesty. Overshare too early and people pull away. Be too intense and they call you unstable. Say something unpopular and you're judged. So instead, we drip-feed our truth. We test the waters. We smile while confessing something that's already processed, resolved, or distant. We curate our pain into anecdotes. But here's the problem. Over time, you start to lose track of what's real disclosure and what's performance. You start to hear yourself telling the same stories, the same jokes, the same deep facts, and you realize none of them actually scare you anymore. They're not intimate, they're just polished. And when someone asks something raw like, "What's something about you you've never said out loud?" you freeze, because now you have to choose between authenticity and safety. Controlled self-disclosure is a way to survive social life, especially in environments where vulnerability is risky. But it also builds walls. It creates the illusion of closeness without real connection. You might leave the conversation feeling understood, but no one actually knows you. It's a rule we all obey because we've all been burned, because people say you can trust me, but they can't, because honesty is weaponized. So we hide in plain sight. We reveal enough to seem real, but not enough to bleed. And the saddest part, sometimes, even in our closest relationships, we keep doing it, out of habit, out of fear, out of not knowing how to stop. You're scrolling through Instagram and see a friend's new haircut. It doesn't look great. In fact, it kind of ages them. But you still comment, OMG, love this. Or maybe you're at work and your colleague presents an idea that's average at best. After the meeting, you smile and say, that was really insightful. Why? Because you're being polite, because you want to encourage them, or because that's what you're supposed to say. That's the superficial praise ritual. It's the social dance of giving compliments you don't fully mean to maintain peace, signal support, or avoid awkwardness. You're not lying exactly. You're just inflating, rounding up, making things sound a bit better than they really are because criticism feels dangerous and silence feels cold. This rule is everywhere, especially online. You say someone's killing it even if their project seems weak. You tell a friend they look amazing even if they're visibly exhausted. You heart every story, like every post, comment with fire emojis, not because you're moved, but because that's the ritual. That's how we show we care now. But it's not just digital. In real life, too, praise has become a default. You meet someone's new partner and say you two are perfect together, even if the vibe is off. You try someone's cooking and say, so good, even if it's bland. You tell your friend their idea is brilliant because it's easier than offering critique. And that's the function of this rule, smoothing out friction. We use praise as social lubricant. It keeps things flowing, warm, friendly. It makes people feel seen, even if they're not truly being evaluated. Praise has become less about truth and more about harmony. But here's the twist, we all know it. We all feel when someone's compliment is generic or automatic. We hear you're so smart and wonder if they say that to everyone. We post something deep and get 10 heart emojis and feel nothing. Because deep down we crave sincere validation, not just approval but understanding. We want someone to say, I loved this because, or this stood out to me because, but that takes effort, vulnerability, focus, and the praise ritual is quick, easy, safe. So we stay in the loop. We praise, we receive praise, we all silently agree not to question it. And this creates a problem. People stop growing because no one tells them when they're off. No one challenges them when they're mid. Mediocrity becomes celebrated not because it's good, but because it's uncriticized. And ironically, the praise starts to feel like pity. You show something personal and they say, amazing, and you wonder if they even looked. You share your work and get a thumbs up and feel unseen. Praise, once meant to uplift, becomes a wall between people. The praise ritual isn't evil, it's protective. It helps us navigate fragile egos and dense social layers. But if we never break it, never say something specific, honest, or real, we lose the point. We become applause machines, rewarding everything and meaning nothing. And the person who says nothing at all, sometimes they're the only one paying attention. You're with a friend and they say something off, maybe a weird comment, maybe a subtle insult. You feel it, you know it's strange, but instead of calling it out or asking what they meant, you laugh, you nod, you move on. Later, someone asks how it went and you say, all good, even though it was. That's discomfort avoidance. It's the internal rule that tells you, don't make things awkward, don't pause the flow, don't be the one who says, wait, that was weird. Instead, smile through it, pretend it didn't happen, repress your reaction for the sake of peace. And this rule shows up in every layer of social life. A coworker touches your arm too long, you step back but say nothing. A family member makes a passive-aggressive joke, you ignore it. Your date starts trauma dumping, you nod empathetically but start mentally checking out. Because confronting discomfort means changing the emotional temperature of the room, and that feels dangerous. It feels like conflict, it feels like exposure. So we learn to avoid, and over time we get really good at it. Discomfort avoidance isn't about cowardice, it's about survival. Most of us were raised in environments where speaking up didn't feel safe, where saying that hurt or that's inappropriate got you labeled as sensitive, dramatic, difficult, so you adapted, you smiled through pain, you became fluent in silence. The rule works like this: if something bothers you, analyze whether addressing it will make the situation worse. If the answer is yes, even just socially worse, suppress it, laugh it off, pretend you're fine. And it's not just about big violations, it happens in tiny moments. Someone gets your name wrong, you let it go. You're at dinner and want to order something different, but everyone else wants sushi, you cave. You're tired and want to leave, but don't want to seem rude, so you stay. All these choices seem small, but they build a pattern, self-abandonment for social safety. And the cost of this rule is internal tension. You smile while something inside clenches. You laugh, but it feels hollow. You say it's fine, but it is. Over time, you lose the signal of your own discomfort. You stop trusting it. You start thinking it's you who's wrong for feeling that way. And when someone finally does ask you, "What's wrong?" you freeze. Because you've rehearsed denial for so long, you don't even know how to be honest anymore. Discomfort avoidance is one of the most common silent rules because it's rewarded. You're seen as mature, composed, agreeable, but it also leads to relationships where nothing real gets resolved. Conflicts pile up under the rug. Resentment grows behind closed smiles. And ironically, the people you protect from discomfort, they don't even notice. They just think you're easygoing. They never realize you've been filtering your emotions for their comfort. Breaking this rule isn't about becoming confrontational. It's about noticing when something hurts and giving yourself permission to not pretend, to pause, to breathe, to say, "I don't think that was okay," even once, even softly. Because the cost of peace should never be your own clarity. You open your phone and see 3 unread texts. You feel drained, you don't want to reply. But instead of saying, "Hey, I need time to myself," you send a like or a haha or a "we should hang soon," even though you won't follow up. Why? Because saying no feels rude, because silence feels cold, because you don't want to seem distant. That's the fake availability signal. It's the social habit of appearing open, interested, or emotionally present, even when you're not. It's the way we keep doors ajar with people we don't want to push away, even when we have no intention of walking through them. You tell someone, "Let's catch up soon," when you really mean, "I hope we don't." You say, "I'm free this weekend," but secretly hope they don't ask. You answer calls you didn't want to receive just so you don't hurt someone's feelings. This rule is based on guilt, the kind that comes from not reciprocating interest. You don't want to reject people directly, so you reject them passively. You keep them close with vague signals, warm language, and artificial smiles. You're emotionally unavailable, but socially agreeable. And the problem is, they believe you, they make plans, they wait, they think you care. And when you don't follow through, they feel confused or rejected, not because you were cruel, but because you were unclear. The fake availability signal shows up in dating constantly. You swipe right because it'd be rude not to. You say, "Maybe next week," to someone you'll never see again. You keep chatting with someone just to avoid ghosting, even though you've already checked out. The relationship drags not because of love, but because of politeness. But it's not just romance. It happens with friends, coworkers, even family. You RSVP yes and cancel last minute. You say "miss you" when you've made no effort to reconnect. You act like you're emotionally here, but you're already gone. Why do we do this? Because direct honesty feels brutal. Saying "I don't have space for this connection" sounds harsh. Saying "I need distance" feels mean, so we fake it. We use soft tones, smiley emojis, and delayed replies to avoid the sting of real rejection. But here's the damage. People build their hopes on signals we don't mean. They think we're available emotionally, physically, mentally, when we're not, and they make decisions based on that illusion. They clear time, they get excited, they try harder, and when we pull away, it feels like betrayal. And here's the twist: we hate when others do it to us. When someone leaves us on read, when they say soon and vanish, when they act warm in public but ignore us privately, we call it fake, flaky, manipulative, but we do the same thing, just softer. The fake availability signal is a social illusion, a mask that says, "I'm still here," even when we've emotionally left the room. And the reason we use it is fear of being disliked, fear of hurting others, fear of confrontation. So we choose dishonesty dressed as kindness. But real kindness is clarity, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it stings a little. "I don't think I have the energy for this right now" is hard to say, but it's real. It lets people move on, recalibrate, find truth instead of waiting on ghosts. So the next time you want to send that soft, polite maybe, ask yourself, is this real availability or just a ritual lie? Because behind every fake signal is a person trying to read you, and you owe them more than static. You and a friend are talking. They just got a promotion and you congratulate them genuinely. But part of you feels a shift, like they're ahead now, like the scoreboard between you just updated, even though no one said there was a game. That's the silent competition norm, the invisible rule that says we're always comparing, even when we pretend we're not. This isn't open rivalry, you're not wishing them harm, but somewhere beneath the surface, your brain registers their win as your loss. because in social groups, status is relative. There's no fixed measurement. So every success, every milestone, every compliment, it recalibrates the hierarchy. The silent competition norm lives in subtle glances, in timing, in pacing your achievements so they don't overshadow someone else's, in holding back your good news because you know someone else is struggling, or worse, sharing it anyway and watching the tension flicker across their face. You notice it in friendships where you both started from the same place, same school, same city, same job, and then one of you starts rising, a new apartment, a better partner, a cooler circle, and suddenly the tone changes. Support becomes slightly performative, conversations become selective, there's warmth but not depth. This norm says, stay in the race but don't admit it's a race. You're expected to celebrate others while secretly benchmarking yourself against them, and if you fall behind, you fake confidence. If you get ahead, you fake humility. In romantic relationships, this norm plays out when one partner starts leveling up financially, socially, or emotionally, and the other feels left behind. They won't say it, but the dynamic shifts. One starts to resent, the other starts to feel guilty. The relationship cracks not from conflict, but from imbalance. In work environments, the silent competition norm becomes poisonous. Colleagues become friendly, but you know every shared success story is also a soft reminder, I'm doing better than you. People smile during meetings, but behind the scenes, they're tracking promotions, raises, LinkedIn updates. Nobody admits it, but everyone knows. The psychology behind this is evolutionary. Human beings are wired for social comparison. It helps us gauge threat, opportunity, and belonging. But in modern life, where most social signals are filtered through curated profiles, filtered photos, and humble brags, the comparisons become constant and invisible. And because no one talks about it, no one helps you regulate it. You start to measure yourself in private. You beat yourself up quietly. You celebrate in silence or downplay your wins to avoid seeming arrogant. You shrink your own joy so others don't feel small, but then feel invisible yourself. The problem with the silent competition norm isn't competition, it's the silence. It forces people to act supportive when they feel insecure. It prevents real conversations. It makes success lonely and failure shameful. You either hide your pride or hide your pain. You can't just be. Breaking this norm means daring to name it, saying things like, part of me felt weird when you got that, I'm happy for you, but I also felt behind. Or hearing someone else win and asking yourself, why do I feel less now, instead of pretending you don't. Because when you bring the comparison into the light, it loses power. You stop pretending everything's equal. You stop shrinking to maintain balance. You allow honest distance or honest closeness instead of fake alignment. The race isn't always toxic, but pretending it doesn't exist, that's what makes people secretly hate each other while hugging. Post a photo. You don't care if it's artistic or meaningful, what matters is how many likes it gets. Not because you're shallow, but because something deep inside you equates attention with worth. This is status-driven validation, a rule where your value feels real only when it's confirmed by others, and the higher their status, the stronger the validation. If a random stranger compliments you, you appreciate it. If someone attractive, popular, or influential says the same thing, it hits different. Why? Because status amplifies meaning. We're social animals wired to climb hierarchies. From childhood, we learn that some people's opinions carry more weight, so we chase their approval sometimes without realizing it. You might not care what your friend thinks, but your boss, your crush, your idol, their praise becomes addictive. This rule shows up everywhere. People name drop not to share information, but to associate themselves with power. People feel seen when a verified account likes their tweet. People feel smarter, funnier, more valuable when someone above them acknowledges them. And the scary part is, even when you think you're being authentic, you're still filtering through this lens. You downplay your interests if they're not seen as high status. You exaggerate your achievements in rooms full of prestige. You even reevaluate your goals, subtly molding them to be more socially respected. The deeper trap is that status is always shifting. What's admired today is irrelevant tomorrow. So you become a mirror, constantly reflecting whatever validation earns the most points. This creates a false self, one that's built not on identity, but on approval metrics. And here's the paradox. The more you chase status-driven validation, the more dependent you become on people who will never truly know you. Your highs are artificial, your lows are crushing, and your sense of worth is never fully yours. It belongs to the audience. To break the cycle, you don't need to stop caring what others think, but you need to notice why it matters to you, whose opinion you're chasing, and what part of yourself you're trading away to get it. You're in a conversation with someone close. You both know there's tension, maybe something has been left unsaid, maybe one of you is pulling away. But instead of talking about it, you both keep playing your roles, smiling, nodding, making small talk, pretending nothing's wrong. This is the mutual role-play expectation, the silent agreement to maintain the illusion of harmony even when truth is knocking. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's survival. Families do this all the time. Friends too. You play the funny one, the supportive one, the forgiving one. Not because it reflects who you are, but because it's what the relationship depends on. And if you stop playing your part, the whole dynamic threatens to collapse. It's emotional theater. Everyone has a script. You don't talk about your needs if your role is the strong one. You don't express anger if your part is the peacekeeper. You suppress discomfort, questions, doubts, because the roles must continue. The problem is, over time, the performance becomes the relationship. Real connection dies under the weight of character maintenance. You start to feel hollow, unseen, misunderstood, but you keep showing up to rehearsals anyway. Why? Because breaking the act would make others uncomfortable, and we've been trained to fear that more than anything. This rule also explains why some relationships feel exhausting, not because of conflict, but because of constant pretending. You're not drained by honesty. You're drained by holding up a version of yourself that isn't true. And here's the worst part. The other person is often doing the exact same thing. Both of you are waiting for permission to be real, but no one makes the first move because the role is safer, familiar, predictable, and it feels like love even when it's just scripted survival. The only way out is risk, breaking character, asking the hard questions, showing a different face. Most people won't. They'd rather lose intimacy than lose comfort. That's the cost of mutual role play. You get peace, but never closeness. You feel something, anger, sadness, frustration, but before it reaches your face, your voice, your body, it gets filtered. You swallow it, shape it, repackage it, not because it's gone, but because it's too much. That's emotional filtering, the internal mechanism that edits your emotional expression based on how it will be received. You don't cry in front of friends because you don't want to be dramatic. You don't show anger at work because you don't want to seem unstable. You don't express fear in relationships because you don't want to seem insecure. The emotion doesn't disappear, it just goes underground where it quietly starts to rot. Society rewards people who appear emotionally clean, stable, neutral, composed, so we adapt, we learn to feel less visibly. To regulate, not to heal, but to perform being fine. This isn't emotional intelligence, it's emotional editing, and over time it creates disconnection, not just from others, but from yourself. You start mistrusting your own emotional instincts. You start second-guessing your tears, your rage, your gut feelings. You become someone who analyzes their emotions before they allow themselves to feel them. This rule is reinforced by culture. Don't overreact. Be the bigger person. Stay calm. The message is always, feeling is allowed, but only if it's palatable, only if it makes others comfortable. And that's where the trap lies, because real connection doesn't come from filtered expression. It comes from truth, messy, unpredictable, raw, but most of us have never been rewarded for being that open. We've been punished, ignored, or shamed. So we learn early, be pleasant, be agreeable, be emotionally low maintenance, even when you're breaking inside. And then we wonder why our relationships feel shallow, why we feel alone in crowds, why no one truly gets us. It's because we're all speaking in emotional subtitles instead of the real language. Breaking this rule takes courage. Not recklessness, not dumping your pain on others, but honesty, showing up without the filter, even if your voice shakes. That's how people actually see you, and maybe even love you. You stop texting first. You stop asking how they are. You stop inviting them out. You don't say anything dramatic. No goodbye, no explanation, no confrontation. You just slowly disappear. Quietly, carefully. That's the discreet withdrawal strategy, a social rule where instead of breaking a bond, you fade from it. And what makes it so common is how unnoticeable it tries to be. People use this when they don't want to hurt someone, or deal with the guilt of saying, I don't want this anymore. Or face the possibility of an emotional reaction. So instead of drawing a line, they blur out of the frame. It happens in friendships, relationships, group chats, work dynamics. The texts become slower, the answers shorter, the presence weaker, until one day there's no contact and no clear reason. It looks like distance, but it's actually avoidance. Avoidance of discomfort, conflict, or accountability. But here's the painful part. For the person on the receiving end, it doesn't feel discreet. It's confusing. It feels like rejection without context, and humans don't handle ambiguity well. The brain starts to fill in blanks. Did I do something wrong? Did they never care? Am I that easy to walk away from? This kind of withdrawal can do more damage than a direct break, not because it's cruel, but because it's unfinished, unspoken. And the lack of closure becomes its own kind of trauma, but people use this strategy because it works. It maintains the illusion of kindness. You can say, we just drifted. You can claim, life got busy. You don't have to be the bad guy, just the absent one. And in some cases, it's true, some bonds fade naturally. But more often they're pushed into silence by someone unwilling to say the truth out loud. The truth that they're no longer invested, no longer comfortable, or never were to begin with. Discreet withdrawal is emotional ghosting disguised as maturity. It gives one person closure and the other questions. And the tragedy is, both walk away thinking it was for the best, while carrying a wound they don't even talk about. If you've ever used this strategy, ask yourself, what were you protecting? Their feelings or your image of yourself as a kind person? Because silence doesn't soften pain, it just makes it harder to understand. And if you've been on the other side of it, know this: their silence says more about them than it ever did about you. You're telling a story, something personal, maybe vulnerable, but halfway through, the other person checks their phone, or nods with a distracted look, or interrupts with a story of their own. You don't say anything, but you feel it. That tiny drop in connection, that quiet realization they weren't really listening. This is the selective attention rule. It's not about who speaks, it's about who gets attention and when. In every social setting, people subconsciously assign value to each person's words. And some people, by charisma, status, or dominance, get more bandwidth. Others are background noise. Think of group conversations. There's always someone who gets listened to fully without interruption, and someone else who barely finishes a sentence before the topic changes, not because they're less interesting, but because the group has silently agreed that their voice carries less weight. This rule teaches people to adapt. If you often get overlooked, you start shortening your thoughts, making them more digestible, or you stop sharing entirely, not because you have nothing to say, but because no one leans in when you speak. And over time, this creates social asymmetry. Some people get used to being heard, others get used to disappearing mid-thought. The most brutal part, no one talks about it. It's not polite to say, "You don't pay attention to me." So instead, people absorb the message in silence. They shrink, soften, step back. Selective attention doesn't mean you're a bad person, but it does reveal your subconscious priorities. Who gets your focus? Who gets full eye contact? Who gets the benefit of patience, curiosity, follow-up questions? Because the truth is, attention is love, it's respect, it's value. And when it's given selectively, people feel the imbalance in their bones. Some compensate by becoming louder, funnier, more agreeable, others just detach. You might never notice when someone stops trying because it doesn't make noise, it just fades. To challenge this rule, start with presence. Notice who you tune into, who you tune out, and ask, what's shaping that choice? You receive a message, "Thanks for finally getting back to me," or "Nice of you to show up." It looks polite, but it's not. It's sugar-coated resentment. This is passive-aggressive courtesy, when people use polite language to deliver concealed irritation, judgment, or dominance. It's not yelling, it's smiling with clenched teeth. The genius of this strategy is that it lets people express dissatisfaction without breaking the rules of civility. They get to vent while pretending they're just being nice. Just joking, didn't mean anything by it. Relax, it's not that deep. And if you respond directly, you look like the sensitive one, like you're overreacting. That's the trap. Passive-aggressive courtesy is a social weapon. It punishes while pretending to praise, like, "Not bad for someone like you." Wow, you actually pulled it off. Good job, finally. Every word technically kind, but the tone, sharpened. This behavior often comes from people who were never taught to express anger directly, or who feel powerless in the relationship. So they weaponize politeness, turning kindness into a mask. It shows up in families, offices, friend groups. The coworker who says, "You look tired today," with a knowing smirk. The friend who says, "Well, some of us don't have all that free time," when you decline an invite. It's all performance, but the emotional sting is real. And because it's polite on the surface, the victim rarely feels justified in confronting it, so they internalize it. Wonder if they're imagining things, start doubting their instincts. That's the hidden cost. It destabilizes the receiver while protecting the sender. And the more this pattern continues, the more toxic the dynamic becomes. People start communicating in code, indirectness, sarcasm, and emotional safety disappears. If you use this behavior, ask yourself, what are you avoiding? Honesty, vulnerability, conflict, because real resolution can't exist without clear language. And if you're on the receiving end, you have a choice. You can play the same game, or you can name it, gently, calmly. "That felt like a dig. Was that your intention?" That one question can break the entire mask, because passive aggression hates direct light, it withers under truth. You tell them you're okay, they ask again. "Are you sure?" You nod, they smile, but you know they're still unsure. So you say it a third time, this time with more energy, more clarity, more warmth. That's the reassurance loop. It's not about information, it's about performance, about proving you're fine, about convincing someone again and again that things are okay, even if they are. This loop happens most often when someone doesn't trust your words or when they themselves are anxious. Your "I'm fine" isn't enough, not because it's unclear, but because they need more certainty than you're giving. So they search for micro-expressions, vocal tones, pauses, hidden meanings. And if they don't find reassurance, they ask again, not to hurt you, but to calm themselves. The loop becomes a cycle. Their anxiety triggers your reassurance never fully lands, so they ask again and again until your "I'm fine" turns into frustration. and then they say, "See, I knew something was wrong." It's a self-fulfilling pattern. This also shows up in deeper relationships, romantic, parental, even close friendships. One person constantly needs to hear, "We're good, you didn't upset me, I still care." And the other person, no matter how consistent or honest, ends up feeling like they're always defending their own kindness. The real damage happens when the reassurance stops feeling sincere and starts feeling like a duty. You don't say, "I love you," because you feel it. You say it to quiet the tension. You don't say it's okay because it is. You say it so you don't have to explain again. And the worst part, the more you offer, the less it's worth. Reassurance becomes like a drug with diminishing returns. And the anxious person, despite all their effort, never feels truly safe. Because the need isn't about the moment, it's about a deeper fear of abandonment, of failure, of being disliked. Breaking the loop requires both sides. The anxious person needs to ask, "What proof am I searching for?" The other person needs to ask, "Am I giving this from love or from exhaustion?" Because when reassurance becomes currency, connection becomes debt, and no one feels free in that space. You're in a conversation, you disagree, but instead of saying, "I think that's wrong," you say, "I see where you're coming from, but," or "Interesting take, though I have a slightly different view," you soften it. Not because you're unsure, but because you want the disagreement to be safe. This is controlled disagreement, a rule where we carefully package our opposing views in ways that protect the social dynamic more than the actual argument. The goal isn't clarity, the goal is harmony. Even if it means suppressing truth. In modern conversations, direct confrontation feels dangerous. People aren't afraid of being wrong, they're afraid of being disliked. So we speak in code, "I hear you, let's agree to disagree." There's truth on both sides. Phrases that sound diplomatic, but often just avoidant. Controlled disagreement allows tension to exist without escalation. It keeps friendships alive, it maintains professional boundaries. But it also creates a culture where no one ever really says what they mean, where real debate dies in a sea of polite hedging. This rule teaches us to value tone over substance. You can say something deeply false, but if you say it kindly, it gets a pass. You can challenge harmful ideas, but if you do it too directly, you're labeled as aggressive. So we adapt, we use disclaimers, we smile more, we cushion our sentences, and in doing so, we often dilute the power of our beliefs. Worse, we teach ourselves that disagreement is a threat, not a conversation. That different opinions are personal attacks, not intellectual contrast. But here's the truth, disagreement is not the enemy. It's the source of clarity, of growth, of real understanding. The problem isn't that we argue, it's that we don't know how to argue. Controlled disagreement isn't inherently bad. It can be respectful, intentional, and constructive. But when it becomes the default, when every opinion is wrapped in soft words to avoid offense, then truth starts suffocating. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can say is, "I don't agree and here's why." Not to win, not to fight, but to be real. You help a friend move, you listen to their problems, you stay late at work, and you don't ask for anything back, at least not directly. But deep down, you're keeping score, you're not greedy, you're not petty, you're just human. And humans manage social credit. This is the invisible currency of relationships: favors, support, attention, sacrifice. Every interaction adds or subtracts from a mental ledger. I've done so much for them. They owe me one. I don't want to ask again, I already asked last time. Social credit management isn't malicious, it's subconscious. It helps us track fairness, balance, reciprocity, but it becomes dangerous when the balance feels off and no one talks about it. That's when resentment builds. I'm always the one initiating. They never check in. I would never do that to them. These thoughts stack quietly until they explode, or worse, they rot, and the other person often has no idea. Because in their head, the balance feels even. Social credit is subjective. What feels like a huge favor to you might feel normal to someone else. What you interpret as generosity, they might see as obligation, and that mismatch creates silent tension. This rule also shows up in group dynamics: the person who always plans, the one who always pays, the one who's just nice. Over time, they start to wonder, do people like me or just what I offer? But they don't ask. Because that would break the illusion, so they keep giving and secretly hoping it gets noticed. The dark side of this rule is emotional manipulation, doing things selflessly but expecting silent repayment. Using guilt instead of honesty, keeping receipts instead of setting boundaries. The healthy alternative isn't to stop giving, it's to start naming. Say what you need, say what you hope for, say what feels off. Not to accuse, but to clarify. Because real connection isn't built on silent debts. It's built on mutual awareness. And if you're not willing to talk about the invisible scorecard, don't be surprised when the relationship crashes from an overdraft you never mentioned. You're talking to someone you care about. They're opening up, saying they feel distant, confused, maybe even hurt. And instead of leaning in, you pull back, not dramatically, just slightly. You joke instead of responding seriously. You say you're overthinking instead of asking why they feel that way. You keep it light. This is the emotional distance tactic. It's a way of staying close without being vulnerable, of staying involved without exposing yourself. Most people use it not because they don't care, but because they're afraid of where full emotional presence might lead. If you acknowledge their hurt, you might have to face your own role in it. If you stay in the discomfort, you might be forced to change. So you create just enough distance to stay safe. This tactic shows up in subtle ways: sarcasm during serious moments, deflecting with logic, minimizing feelings with phrases like, "You're making a big deal out of nothing." It allows the person to technically be present while emotionally staying behind a wall. The tactic isn't about cruelty, it's about control, keeping the emotional environment manageable, predictable, less intense, but the cost is heavy. When someone uses this tactic consistently, the people around them start to feel invisible, not because they're being ignored, but because their deeper emotions are never met with real engagement. Over time, this creates relationships that look stable from the outside but feel cold on the inside, safe but shallow, reliable but distant. And often the person using the tactic doesn't even realize it. They believe they're showing up. They believe they're being reasonable, but the person on the other side is starving for connection. And when they eventually pull away, the distancer is shocked. "I was always there," they say, but presence without emotional openness isn't connection, it's just proximity. The emotional distance tactic helps people survive, especially those raised in environments where vulnerability was punished. But survival isn't the same as intimacy. And if you want real closeness, the tactic has to be dropped. You have to risk being uncomfortable, being wrong, being seen, because the wall that protects you from emotional pain also blocks you from emotional love. Ask someone what they think of your new haircut. They say they like it. You believe them. You ask if they enjoyed the dinner you made. They say it was great. You smile. You ask how you did on your presentation. You were amazing, they say. And in each case, you accept the answer without much question. Why? Because these are low-stakes truths, easy to give, easy to believe. This is the low-stakes truth preference. It describes how people are far more comfortable hearing and telling truths that don't disrupt anything. We say we value honesty, but what we usually mean is safe honesty. Honesty that confirms, that supports, that doesn't challenge our self-image or stability. When the truth might hurt, destabilize, or create conflict, people tend to avoid it. But when it's low stakes, the truth flows freely. You have spinach in your teeth. You're late again. That shirt's not your color. These feel manageable, even funny, but ask someone, "Did I hurt you last week? Or do you think I'm truly happy in this job?" And suddenly the truth becomes heavy, loaded, dangerous. The rule operates on both sides. As a speaker, you offer truths that feel acceptable. You say what's honest within limits. You shape your truth to the context, to the listener's capacity. You want to be honest, but not at the cost of peace. As a listener, you often seek confirmation, not correction. You ask questions expecting comfort, not challenge. And when the answer feels too real, too critical, you flinch. You question the person, not the content. This preference isn't about being fake, it's about emotional efficiency. Life is already stressful. Most people don't want their daily conversations to feel like therapy, so we trade depth for stability. And sometimes that's fine. But when it becomes a pattern, when every interaction is softened, filtered, nice, the relationship starts to feel unreal, like a pleasant echo chamber, and deeper issues go untouched. The solution isn't to drop harsh truths randomly. It's to slowly increase the stakes of your honesty. To say, "Can I tell you what I really think, even if it's not easy?" And to receive that in return, because truth, in the end, is only useful if it survives outside of comfort. You get praised in a meeting. Instead of saying thank you say it was nothing. Someone compliments your outfit. You shrug it off. You score well on a test. You downplay it. "I just got lucky." This is the public modesty reflex, the automatic instinct to minimize yourself when recognized, not because you lack pride, but because showing pride in public feels like a risk. The moment someone compliments you, there's a second voice in your head saying, "Don't get cocky. Stay humble." People don't like arrogance, and so instead of absorbing the praise, you deflect it, push it away, pretend it wasn't a big deal. The reflex is deeply social. We're taught to value humility, but often what we perform isn't real humility, it's self-shrinking disguised as politeness. You're not actually rejecting the compliment. You're making yourself smaller to maintain social comfort. Because when someone owns their success openly, especially in group settings, it creates friction, envy, discomfort, even judgment, so we develop the reflex to dodge that, especially among people we don't fully trust, especially if we fear being labeled arrogant, especially if we've seen confidence punished before. This rule plays out more sharply depending on gender, culture, status. In many environments, confidence is rewarded only when it's wrapped in modesty. You can be proud, but not too proud. You can win, but you have to act like you didn't try. You can shine, but only if you dim yourself just enough to not blind others. And so people learn to speak in disclaimers. "I just got lucky. It's not a big deal. I still have a lot to learn." all technically true, but often used to soften their own light. The danger is that over time the reflex becomes internalized. You start believing you don't deserve the praise. You stop seeing your wins clearly. You forget how to stand tall. To break the reflex, practice this. The next time someone praises you, say thank you, just that, no detour, no downplay, let it land, because modesty should be a choice, not a reflex, and confidence should never feel like a crime. You finish presenting an idea, there's silence, no immediate feedback. Then someone says, interesting, but doesn't elaborate. Hours later, you get a message. Hey, just wanted to say that idea was actually really smart. It lands late, delayed, not because they didn't like it, but because they weren't ready to validate you in the moment. That's the approval delay strategy. It's when people intentionally withhold immediate validation to maintain emotional leverage, uncertainty, or control. The delay isn't accidental, it's strategic. Approval, when given late, becomes more powerful because it catches you in a moment of self-doubt and it makes you more sensitive to the person who finally gives it. This rule often comes from people who instinctively protect their authority in social settings. They don't want to seem too impressed, too eager, too quick to praise, so they create space, delay recognition, keep you guessing. Sometimes it's subconscious, sometimes it's calculated. Either way, the goal is the same: control the emotional tempo. In relationships, this strategy can keep someone hooked. If you praise them too early, they might relax, feel secure. But if you wait, let them question themselves a little, your eventual compliment hits harder, stronger, deeper, like water after thirst. In workplaces, leaders often use this without realizing. An employee performs well, but instead of acknowledging them in the moment, the manager stays quiet. Only later, maybe privately, does the praise come. The message is, you have to earn my approval, and I decide when you get it. But the psychological effect is instability. People begin to perform not out of passion, but out of hope for that rare, delayed good job. And when it comes, it feels like relief, not pride. The most dangerous version of this is inconsistency. Sometimes you're praised, sometimes ignored, never sure why. That emotional roulette makes you crave the next win even more. Approval becomes addictive because it's unpredictable. To break the pattern, recognize the delay for what it is. Not a reflection of your worth, but a tactic that reveals more about them than about you. And if you notice yourself using this strategy, ask why. Is it pride, control, fear of giving too much power away? Because timely approval isn't weakness, it's clarity, and in clarity, people grow. You post something vulnerable, the same 3 people like it, you share good news. The usual ones congratulate you, you hit a hard moment, and you already know who'll comment, who'll message, who'll stay silent. This is the predictable support display, the social rule where people fall into fixed roles of when, how, and how much they express support. It becomes almost scripted. You celebrate, they react, you struggle, they comfort. But it's always the same ones, always in the same way. And after a while, you stop wondering who cares because the pattern has told you everything. This predictability offers comfort. It creates a sense of emotional routine, but it also reveals something darker. That support is often more about performance than presence. People show up when it's expected, not necessarily when it's felt. For some, it's about image, commenting on your success not to celebrate you, but to be seen doing it. For others, it's about duty. They're kind, supportive, but never initiate. They just respond. There's no spontaneity, no surprise, no personal resonance, just the act of being there because that's their assigned role. The danger is that you start mistaking consistency for closeness. You believe someone truly sees you when in reality, they're just following the social script. And the reverse hurts even more. People you thought were close go silent during your high or low moments. Not because they don't care, but because support isn't part of how they show love. Or worse, because your success or pain triggers something in them they don't know how to process. This rule also conditions you as the receiver. You know when to expect applause. You know when silence means judgment. So you start posting, sharing, and even experiencing life through the lens of anticipated reactions. Will this get me validation? Will they ignore this again? Support becomes a scoreboard, not a connection. Breaking this means challenging patterns, surprising someone with unscheduled kindness, or noticing who supports you only when it's easy and who shows up when no one else is watching. Because real support isn't predictable, it's felt. And sometimes it comes quietly, without performance, but it lands deeper than any public praise ever could. You're feeling awkward, maybe nervous, maybe even hurt. But instead of showing that, you make a joke. You make people laugh, you lighten the mood. You say, well, at least I'll have a great story, even though part of you is falling apart. That's the surface humor shield. It's the reflex to protect vulnerability by wrapping it in laughter, to replace emotional risk with entertainment. You don't cry, you joke about crying. You don't complain, you sarcastically exaggerate your struggle. You don't say, I'm scared, you say, this is fine, like the meme. It's not that the humor is fake, it's real, but it's incomplete. It reveals just enough emotion to be relatable, but not enough to be exposed. This shield develops early. Maybe you learned that people don't know how to handle sadness, or that being funny made you likable, or that if you laughed first, no one could hurt you. So the shield became armor, safe, predictable, rewarded. You became the comic relief in your own story. The problem is, while people laugh, they rarely ask more. The joke becomes the end of the conversation, not the beginning. People think you're okay, you seem strong, lighthearted, quick-witted. But inside, you're waiting for someone to say, "No, really, how are you?" And when they don't, the isolation grows, because now you help build the mask, and breaking it would feel like betrayal. Surface humor can be a gift, a bridge, a release, a way to cope. But when it becomes the only language, you forget how to speak without it. Emotions become punchlines. Pain becomes a setup, and your real needs stay untouched. The shield works until it doesn't, until you hit something laughter can't process, until you realize people love the performance but don't know the person. And then the silence feels heavier than the jokes ever did. The solution isn't to stop being funny, it's to also be real, to let the joke land and then keep talking. That was funny, but also kind of true. That one sentence can open a window. Let someone see behind the curtain, because you deserve more than applause. You deserve to be understood. You're in a conversation and you share something personal, not too deep, just enough to show openness. You talk about being tired lately, or how work's been rough, or how dating's been disappointing. The person across from you softens, they lean in, they share something back, now you're connected. This is adaptive vulnerability, the strategic use of mild honesty to build trust, manage perception, or deepen rapport without actually exposing your most fragile truths. It's not fake, you're not lying. But you're curating which parts of your pain are socially acceptable to show, and which ones are too risky, too messy, too real. Adaptive vulnerability is powerful. In the right dose, it makes you seem authentic, relatable, human. In interviews, people admit to past failures, but the ones they've already overcome. In dating, people confess insecurities, but only the ones that sound cute or manageable. I can be a bit of a perfectionist. Sometimes I overthink things. These confessions open doors. They invite intimacy without threat. But beneath that, there's a calculation. What makes me seem open without making me seem broken? What truth can I reveal that strengthens the connection instead of weakening it? This rule is especially common in high-functioning people, those who are used to performing well. They want connection, but they also want control. So they open up, but only as much as they can script, only in contexts where the risk is low. This creates relationships built on partial truth, not deception, just selective transparency. The result, people feel close to you, but only to the parts of you you've deemed safe, and you remain protected behind layers of polished honesty. The danger is that over time, even you lose track of what you're not sharing. The line between your curated self and your full self starts to blur, and deep down, there's a quiet fear. If someone ever saw everything, would they still stay? Adaptive vulnerability is not weakness, it's a survival mechanism, but true intimacy begins where strategy ends, and sometimes the scariest move is to stop editing. To say what actually hurts without a punchline, without a frame, just the raw version, the one no one claps for but someone might hold. You're in a group and someone shares an unpopular opinion. There's a pause, everyone looks around, then one person nods, another chuckles, someone says, "Yeah, I can see that." The tension drops, the room relaxes. This is acceptance signaling, a behavior where people subtly communicate that something or someone is safe to agree with. It's how groups decide without words what's acceptable. You see it in body language, facial expressions, tone. One approving glance can shift the mood. One sarcastic comment can destroy it. People don't just seek acceptance, they watch for signs of it in others, and once they see it, they feel freer to join in. This is why people laugh harder when someone else laughs first, why people agree with opinions they were unsure about once they see them being accepted. It's not about logic, it's about social permission. Acceptance signaling governs every group you've ever been part of. It explains how inside jokes form, how cliques operate. How some people become the voice while others remain silent. When someone shares a controversial idea, the group doesn't analyze it immediately, it analyzes the reactions to it. Is this safe to support or dangerous to touch? So you get mirroring, you get strategic nodding. You get, "I was just about to say the same thing," even if they weren't. And over time, the group shapes itself into a reflection of its dominant signals, not its private thoughts. This rule is especially powerful in online spaces. Likes, upvotes, retweets, all forms of public acceptance signals. And once something gains momentum, it becomes harder to oppose, because disapproval now feels like social betrayal. So most people fall in line not because they agree, but because no one else is objecting. The silence becomes its own signal. The danger is conformity without awareness. Opinions start to blend. Individuality gets buried under group calibration, and real disagreement becomes a social risk. To see this rule in action, watch your own instincts in a new group. Do you wait for others before you speak? Do you adjust your tone depending on who's nodding? Do you switch positions depending on which view gets rewarded? Acceptance signaling isn't inherently bad, it creates cohesion, belonging, safety. But unchecked, it becomes a filter that edits your thoughts before you even have them. And real connection, the kind that lasts, can only begin when you stop looking around to see what's okay to feel. You're in a conversation and you downplay your hobbies. I'm kind of into that, but not really. You talk about your opinions but phrase them as questions. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but you say what you believe, then instantly soften it. But that's just me. This is identity softening, the subtle way we reduce the clarity of who we are to avoid rejection, challenge, or disapproval. It's not lying, it's not being fake, it's shrinking, diluting, making your identity less sharp so it's less risky. This rule shows up most when people feel they're with someone more dominant, more judgmental, or simply harder to read. You might talk about your passion but present it like a phase. You might express an unpopular opinion but immediately say, "But I totally get the other side too." The goal isn't diplomacy, it's self-protection. If you make your identity soft, it can't be attacked. If you don't commit to a belief, no one can call you wrong. If you never fully show yourself, you never have to feel the pain of being rejected for who you are. This is why people say things like, "I don't know much about this," but even when they do, or "I might be crazy," but before saying something perfectly reasonable. It's not modesty, it's fear dressed up as politeness. The problem is, the more you soften, the more invisible you become. People don't remember soft identities, they remember sharp ones, not arrogant, not extreme, just clear, anchored. Whole identity softening trains you to blend, to harmonize, to reduce friction, and in some cases that's survival. Especially for people who have been punished for being too much, too intense, too opinionated. But if it becomes a habit, it hollows you out. You start forgetting your own lines, your own convictions, and worst of all, people never get a chance to love the real you. They only get to like the edited version. To unlearn this rule, practice clarity, not in volume, but in precision. Say, "I love this," instead of "I guess I like it." Say, "This is what I believe," instead of "I could be wrong." You don't have to be loud, you just have to be true. Because soft identity might keep you safe, but sharp identity sets you free. You ask your friend if they're okay, they say yes, but their voice sounds flat. You invite someone out, they say they'd love to but never follow up. You tell a coworker they can always talk to you and they smile politely but never do. These are social safety lies, the small, polite untruths we exchange to keep the emotional peace. They're not malicious, they're protective. They serve as social buffers, making interactions smoother, less confrontational, less vulnerable. When someone says, "It's all good," what they often mean is, "I don't want to explain what's wrong." When someone says, "We should totally hang out," what they mean is, "Let's not, but I don't want to be rude." When you say, "I'm here if you need me," sometimes you mean, "Please don't make me uncomfortable with your pain." These lies are woven into modern communication. And because everyone knows the script, no one challenges it. You smile back, you nod, you let it go. But the deeper cost is cumulative. Over time, social safety lies create distance. They block intimacy, they signal care but not real connection, and they teach people not to reach out, not to open up, not to risk, because no one's actually listening. Everyone's just playing their part. The tragedy is people often want to be honest. They want to say, "I'm not okay." They want to say, "I'm lonely," but they fear being seen as too much, as inconvenient, as awkward. They default to the safe lie, the "I'm fine," the "no worries," the "I'll let you know," and each time a piece of truth stays hidden. For this rule to break, someone has to go first, has to say, "Actually, I'm struggling." Has to say, "Thanks, but I don't think we will hang out," and that's okay. Has to say, "I care about you, but I don't have the capacity right now." These truths are uncomfortable, but they're real, and realness, even when awkward, is how trust is built. Social safety lies are easy. But they cost us honesty, and without honesty, no connection lasts. You're upset, but you don't feel it right away. You go about your day, distracted, functional, composed. Then later, hours, days, even weeks, it hits. The sadness, the anger, the anxiety. Not because it grew, but because it was always there, waiting behind the curtain. That's the emotional delay reflex. A subconscious defense that postpones emotional response until it's safer, quieter, or more manageable. You don't cry during the fight, you cry in the shower. You don't panic at the breakup, you panic while folding laundry 3 days later. You say, "I'm fine," and believe it, until your body tells you otherwise. This delay isn't dysfunction, it's a coping mechanism. Your brain senses that feeling right now would be too much, too disruptive, too risky, so it compartmentalizes. It holds back the wave until you're alone or stable or numb enough to process. You might think you're strong, you might even get praised for how calm and collected you are. But the storm is just postponed, not canceled. And when it returns, it's often more confusing, because the trigger is gone, the situation passed, and yet the emotion finally arrives raw, uninvited, and unlinked from context. Emotional delay shows up in high-functioning people, in caretakers, in those trained to hold things together. And while it helps them survive in the moment, it also teaches them that emotions are inconvenient, that to feel is to risk losing control. So they learn to feel later, if at all. The danger is that delayed emotions don't always find their way back. Some get stuck, repressed, somatized into fatigue, tension, restlessness. Others explode seemingly out of nowhere. Why are you so angry? Someone asks. You don't know, but it's not just about today, it's about everything you postponed. Breaking the reflex doesn't mean feeling everything all at once. It means noticing the delay, asking yourself, what am I not feeling right now? And why might that be? It means creating space, even 5 quiet minutes to check in before the wave crashes later. Because feeling now is hard, but feeling later in the dark without clarity is often harder. You text someone and they don't reply. You follow up, still nothing. You know the answer, but you don't get the words. You apply for something, don't get it, and no one says why. You reach out to an old friend, they seem distant, and the warmth never returns. No one tells you you're rejected, but you feel it. That's the unspoken rejection rule. A social mechanism where people reject others not through words, but through absence, ambiguity, and emotional fading. It's cleaner, less confrontational, but often more painful, because it leaves you without closure, without language, without validation for your hurt. You can't grieve what hasn't been named, so you spiral, you overthink. Maybe they're just busy. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe they didn't see it. The uncertainty is worse than rejection. At least when someone says no, you know where you stand. But silence breeds hope, then disappointment, then shame for hoping. The reason this rule exists is simple. Rejection is uncomfortable for the rejector. Saying I'm not interested, or I don't want this connection, or you're not a fit feels cruel. So instead, people ghost, they avoid, they let time do the dirty work. It's easier for them, but not for you. This rule appears everywhere: dating, friendships, work, family. Sometimes it's soft, let's touch base soon, and then never again. Sometimes it's harsh, a sudden unfollow, no context, no goodbye. But the emotional pattern is always the same. The other person leaves you to interpret the silence. And your brain, desperate for certainty, starts creating narratives, often crueler than the truth. This hurts not just because of rejection, but because of ambiguity. You don't just lose the person, you lose your own clarity. The antidote isn't always getting an answer. Sometimes the answer is, they've already said enough through their silence. You don't need more proof. You don't need the words. You need to stop waiting for the kind of closure they've already shown they won't give, because unspoken rejection is rejection. And honoring your own experience means letting go, even when no one said goodbye. You're in a group chat, someone sends a heartfelt message, thanking everyone for their support or sharing how much the friendship means. You cringe a little, not because it's bad, but because it feels too much, too open, too exposed. That's sincerity regulation, the silent rule that says emotional honesty is only acceptable in controlled doses, especially in public, especially in groups. We admire sincerity, but only when it follows unwritten limits. Be real, but not too real. Be emotional, but stay witty. Be grateful, but keep it light. Go too far and people get uncomfortable. You see this in birthday posts. Someone writes something genuine and others respond with emojis, sarcasm, deflections. Stop making me cry, someone says. Too wholesome, another replies. These are ways of pulling the emotional temperature back down, not to hurt, but to regulate. Because raw sincerity can feel socially unbalanced. It breaks the rhythm. It demands a level of presence most people aren't ready for. So we dilute it, wrap it in humor, skip past it quickly. The fear behind this rule is vulnerability. Not just for the speaker, but for the listeners. When someone shares something deep, everyone else has to decide, do I match this energy? Do I ignore it? Do I respond sincerely or pretend I didn't read it deeply? And most people aren't prepared for that level of emotional clarity in casual spaces. So we train each other subtly to keep sincerity within limits. This shows up in relationships too. Someone says, I love you too soon. Someone opens up about trauma too early. The reaction isn't rejection, it's discomfort. The timing felt wrong, the context felt mismatched, and so the person learns to hold back next time, to time their honesty more carefully, to package sincerity in ways that do disrupt the flow. The cost, people become emotionally cautious, not fake, just filtered. They edit their truth until it's palatable, but connection doesn't grow in palatability, it grows in risk, in moments where someone says, I mean this, even if their voice shakes. Sincerity regulation keeps the group smooth but makes individuals feel lonely, because everyone is playing the same game, wondering if anyone else feels this deeply too. Someone has to go first, not perfectly, just honestly. That's how sincerity becomes contagious instead of corrected. You ask your friend for advice, even though your mentor would know more. You invite your roommate to your celebration, not the coworker who helped you earn it. You support the people closest to you, even if others deserve it more. That's proximity bias, the tendency to overvalue people based on physical, emotional, or social closeness, and undervalue those who are further away. It's not about merit, it's about access. Who's in your bubble? Who's around when you make a decision? Who do you feel connected to, even if they're less relevant to the situation? This bias shapes friendships, work dynamics, even social justice. We care more about a neighbor than a stranger, more about a colleague than someone across the globe. And while that's human, it's also limiting. Proximity creates blind spots. You forgive a friend's mistake, but harshly judge the same behavior in someone online. You praise a teammate's mediocre work, while ignoring someone brilliant you barely know. You listen to those who speak first, not those who speak best. This rule explains loyalty politics, why people defend harmful individuals. I know them, they're not like that. It explains cliques, promotions, who gets invited, who gets believed, not based on truth, but on nearness, emotional or physical. The bias runs deeper in crisis. One local tragedy feels more urgent than a distant genocide. One personal inconvenience feels more important than a global issue. Because the brain prioritizes what's felt, not what's true, and what's felt is shaped by proximity. This doesn't mean people are selfish. It means empathy has a radius, and unless expanded, it stays tight. The solution isn't to abandon those close to you. It's to zoom out once in a while, to ask, am I supporting this person because they deserve it or because they're here? Am I listening to this voice because it's right or because it's familiar? Proximity bias is natural, but fairness requires effort. And sometimes, the most valuable truth comes from someone not in the room. You hear something that bothers you, a comment, a tone, a behavior. Your first instinct is to react, to say something sharp, sarcastic, honest. But you pause, you ask yourself, is this worth it? Will they understand what I mean? Will this just make things worse? And instead of speaking, you adjust. You smile, nod, say nothing, or give a diluted version of what you really wanted to say. That's the response filtering protocol, a subconscious system that scans every emotional impulse through layers of anticipated outcome, risk, and safety. Before you react, you calculate. This rule isn't about restraint, it's about optimization. You don't want the most authentic response. You want the one that achieves your goal without social damage. In conflict, you pick your battles. In relationships, you manage tone. In public, you reword opinions. Not because you're dishonest, but because raw truth, unfiltered, often backfires. We've all seen what happens when people speak without filtering. They hurt others, make scenes, lose friends. So over time, we train ourselves to regulate our responses like a PR team. You can feel it mid-conversation, the flicker of real emotion, followed by the edit. Don't say that. Say it differently. Say nothing, and sometimes that's wise. But sometimes it turns you into a ghost of yourself, polite, agreeable, vague. The danger of overfiltering is emotional erosion. You start to forget what your unfiltered response even was. You become skilled at adjusting, at saying the right thing, but lose touch with your real voice. And then in moments when honesty matters most, you hesitate, you second guess, you default to smoothness over substance. This rule is especially strong in high-stakes dynamics, power imbalances, fragile relationships, professional settings. You're not just reacting to what was said, but to who said it, how they might interpret your response, and what it could cost you. To break the spell, try this. Next time you feel the filter kick in, don't speak, just notice. What did you want to say? What did you actually say? And what are you afraid would happen if you said the real thing? The answers might not always justify honesty, but they'll bring you back to yourself. Someone says something offensive, inappropriate, wrong. The room freezes for a moment, then everyone pretends it didn't happen. Laughter resumes, topic changes. No one calls it out, no one corrects it. That's face-saving silence, the collective decision to let something slide not because it's okay, but because challenging it would be worse. Worse for the mood, the dynamic, the fragile ego of the person who said it. This rule is rooted in discomfort management. Social tension is expensive. Calling someone out risks confrontation, embarrassment, awkwardness. So instead, people swallow it, and the silence isn't approval, it's a truce, a temporary peace agreement where truth is sacrificed for harmony. You see this in families. Someone makes a passive-aggressive dig, no one responds. You see it at work. A manager says something problematic, the team stays quiet. You see it in friend groups. A joke crosses a line, it's just humor. Everyone keeps the flow going, even as something inside them flinches. The logic is simple. If you speak up, you become the disruptor, not the person who caused the problem, but the person who named it, and that's often punished socially. People get labeled too sensitive, dramatic, confrontational. So over time, most people learn, let it pass, keep it light, don't make things weird, but the cost is cumulative. Every silence becomes complicity. Every unchallenged moment becomes part of the group's normal. And the person who was hurt, they see it, they feel it, they remember it. Face-saving silence isn't about morality, it's about risk management. But it teaches people that comfort matters more than accountability. That peace is better than integrity. That social smoothness beats emotional honesty. To challenge this rule, you don't have to explode, you don't have to shame. Sometimes all it takes is a pause. A wait, what did you mean by that? A that didn't sit right with me. A shift in tone that says, this isn't invisible. Most people won't go there. They'd rather save face than break flow. But someone has to speak, or the silence becomes the story. You hug a friend a little longer than usual. They stiffen slightly. You tell someone you miss them and they joke it off. You compliment a coworker sincerely and they seem awkward. These are signs of the affection distance norm, the invisible guideline that dictates how close is too close when expressing emotional warmth, not just physically but verbally, emotionally, energetically. Every culture, every relationship, every social circle has its own setting. Too cold and you seem detached. Too warm and you seem invasive. Affection must hit the sweet spot or risk discomfort. This rule isn't about love, it's about timing, context, and calibration. You can love someone deeply, but if your expression of that love arrives at the wrong moment, it's perceived as inappropriate. Think of someone texting, "I care about you," out of the blue. For some, it's beautiful. For others, it feels intense, confusing, even needy. Same message, different norms. The affection distance norm is why people hesitate before saying, "I love you," why they laugh after compliments, why they add lol to soften emotional texts. They're not avoiding sincerity, they're managing exposure, because unguarded affection feels vulnerable, risky, and society has trained us to pace it carefully, especially for men, especially in public, especially in cultures that equate softness with weakness. So we ration our kindness, keep it light, use emojis instead of real words. Wait for birthdays to say how we really feel. The result is emotional famine. People who desperately want to feel appreciated, affirmed, seen, but no one wants to be the first to go too far. So everyone stays just a little emotionally distant, just enough to be safe, but not enough to feel close. Breaking this rule requires courage, not grand gestures, but tiny risks. Say, "I'm proud of you," without sarcasm. Hug without apology. Tell someone they matter on a random Tuesday. You might feel awkward, they might deflect, but that's just the norm reacting. The truth underneath, people crave warmth, and they remember the ones who gave it, even if it came too soon. You ask someone why they didn't respond to your message. They say, "Sorry, I've been swamped." But you saw them online all day. You ask a friend why they've been distant. They say, "Just tired lately." But something feels off. You ask yourself why you stayed in a job you hate, and you say, "Because it's stable." But deep down, it's fear, not stability. These are examples of the truth substitution reflex, the automatic tendency to give acceptable reasons instead of real ones. Not to deceive, but to protect feelings, image, safety. The substituted truth is close enough to sound honest, but far enough to avoid risk. It happens fast, instinctive, you don't even notice it. You say, "I can't come," instead of "I don't want to." You say, "That's interesting," instead of "That's wrong." You say, "I'm over it," when you're not. This reflex is trained. We learn early that real truth often leads to punishment, conflict, rejection, awkwardness, so we soften. Edit, replace, and the substituted version becomes habit. You start lying so smoothly, even you believe it. The danger is disconnection from others and from yourself. When you keep replacing truth with what's easier, your relationships become built on partial reality. You think people know you, but they only know your scripts, and over time, your inner compass blurs. You stop asking what's really true. You start answering in templates. "I'm fine, busy." It's complicated. Truth substitution is especially common in emotionally intelligent people, those who can read the room and adjust. They know what version of truth each situation can tolerate, so they shape it accordingly. But shaping too often turns into shrinking, into avoiding hard conversations, into staying in situations that no longer reflect your truth because the substituted version still makes sense. Breaking this reflex doesn't mean radical honesty, it means honest awareness. Ask, is what I'm saying true or just harmless? Is it what I feel or what's easier to say? Because truth, when spoken clearly, might shake the room, but it also clears the air. And you can't build a real life on substituted sentences. You're talking and someone raises their eyebrows slightly, or tilts their head, or lets out a tiny involuntary hum. It lasts a second, but you feel it. Your brain flags it. Suddenly you second guess what you just said. You edit the rest of your sentence. You shrink a little. That's an invisible judgment cue. A tiny, subtle signal that someone's opinion of you might be shifting, not because they say it, but because they leak it. Nonverbal, unconscious, but powerful. We pick up on these cues constantly. A brief silence after a joke, a quick glance to the side, a delayed aha. Our nervous system interprets it as threat, not physical but social, and we respond by adapting, changing our tone, backtracking, apologizing, or shutting down entirely. Invisible judgment cues are often more impactful than direct feedback. Someone can say, "I agree," but if their voice is flat or their eyes shift away, you don't believe them. Someone can say, "That's interesting," but their micro-expression betrays skepticism. The words pass, but the message lands elsewhere. These cues shape conversations, group dynamics, and even identity. Over time, people adjust who they are around certain individuals, not because they've been told to, but because they've learned what feels safe to express. The problem is these cues are rarely intentional. People aren't trying to judge you. Their face just moves, their tone just shifts. But your brain, evolved for tribal survival, detects them as threats. This makes socializing exhausting for sensitive people. You're not imagining slights, you're tracking real signals. The mistake is thinking they always mean something personal. They don't. That furrowed brow, maybe they were thinking about something else. That silence, maybe they didn't hear you. That quick glance at their phone, maybe they just got a notification. Interpreting invisible judgment cues accurately is impossible. What you can do is notice your reaction. Do you feel small, defensive, self-conscious? That's your cue, not theirs. And that's where power begins. You can't control micro-judgments, but you can learn to pause before internalizing them. Because most people don't even know what their face just said, but you've already written a whole story about it. You're feeling tense, but you don't want to talk about it, so you get a little sarcastic, a bit distant. Someone notices and they start acting careful, unsure. Now they feel the tension. And suddenly you feel better, not because the tension is gone, but because now it's shared. That's the discomfort transfer loop, a social mechanism where one person's emotional unease gets passed to another through tone, behavior, or energy. No one says it out loud, but the discomfort moves from body to body, voice to voice, until everyone's carrying it and no one knows where it started. It happens in relationships all the time. One person is upset but doesn't want to confront it, so they sigh a lot, go quiet, move things around aggressively. The other person picks up the signal and starts adjusting, talking softer, walking on eggshells, trying to fix the energy. The loop is now active. One person's discomfort has become a shared burden, but without clarity, without words, just tension floating. This also happens in groups. One person enters a room with heavy energy. No one says anything, but the atmosphere changes. People talk less. Eye contact drops. Smiles fade. No one knows why, but everyone feels it, and they start managing the space, managing each other. The transfer has occurred. This loop isn't always toxic. Sometimes it's how empathy works. You feel what others feel, and that leads to connection. But when it becomes chronic, when people habitually leak discomfort instead of expressing it, the environment becomes emotionally confusing. No one owns their feelings. Everyone absorbs them. And over time, relationships become emotionally cluttered. The original tension is never named, just distributed. What breaks the loop? Language. Someone saying, "You seem off, do you want to talk about it?" Or the person themselves saying, "I'm feeling anxious today, and I think I'm projecting a bit." These moments puncture the loop, give shape to the fog, but most people never say it. They just carry the weight until it's passed again quietly. The discomfort transfer loop teaches us this. Energy is contagious, and silence, when charged, still speaks volumes. The only way to stop the loop is to name what's being passed. You hear the same advice from two people. One is a stranger with a small platform. The other is a well-known expert or just someone with a confident voice and followers. You instantly believe the second one more, not because the content was better, but because the source had status. That status-based trust, the rule that says people tend to trust, admire, and follow those with visible markers of social value, regardless of merit. We say we value truth, credentials, logic. Often we trust who says it more than what is being said. This starts early. A kid believes the popular classmate before the quiet one. A student trusts the loud, charismatic teacher over the shy, brilliant one. Adults aren't immune. We call it charisma, presence, gravitas. But underneath, it's status. The brain evolved to track hierarchy. In tribal groups, the higher status member had better resources, more allies, and a stronger chance of survival, so listening to them made sense. Today it translates into social cues, followers, titles, aesthetic, delivery. If someone sounds authoritative, we suspend doubt. If someone lacks those signals, we analyze harder, we demand proof. Status-based trust shapes everything: politics, medicine, influencers, managers, even friendships. People trust those who already seem trusted, and it becomes a loop. Trust leads to status, status leads to more trust. This creates blind spots. You might dismiss someone brilliant because they don't look the part. You might follow someone dangerous because they do. And worse, you might doubt your own insights if you don't feel high status enough to believe yourself. The rule also shows up in group dynamics. If the leader likes someone, others follow suit. If a low-status person raises a concern, it's ignored. But if someone with clout says the same thing, suddenly it's valid. To resist this rule, practice source awareness. Ask, would I still believe this if someone else said it? Am I reacting to the idea or the person delivering it? And in your own life, don't wait for permission to be believed. Status helps, but clarity, compassion, and truth can cut through the hierarchy if you dare to speak anyway. You're talking with someone, and every time you start a story, they jump in. Their voice is louder, their pace faster. And slowly, without meaning to, you start shortening your sentences. You let them lead, you laugh more, talk less. That's conversational deference, the pattern where people unconsciously yield conversational space to those with more energy, dominance, or perceived authority. It's not about silence, it's about shrinking your voice to fit the room. This rule plays out in every group setting. One person becomes the anchor and others revolve around them. not because they're smarter, but because they claim the space first. They speak with certainty, interrupt confidently, react fast, and others, without noticing, adapt. You say less, you hedge more, you pause to let them speak even when it's your turn. Conversational deference doesn't mean you lack ideas. It means you've been socially conditioned to yield, maybe from upbringing, maybe from power dynamics, maybe from subtle feedback over time. You learn that pushing back is risky, that cutting in feels rude, that holding the floor too long makes people uncomfortable, so you make yourself smaller. This also happens across social hierarchies, gender, class, age. Studies show men interrupt women more often. Higher status individuals speak longer without being interrupted. People from marginalized groups often defer automatically, not out of agreement, but out of survival. The damage is subtle but real. Over time, people forget what it feels like to fully own their thoughts aloud. They start editing mid-sentence, anticipating interruption, apologizing for clarity, and the dominant voices stay dominant not always because they're right but because they're comfortable. Breaking this pattern starts with awareness. Notice when you shrink, when you switch from leading to nodding, from telling to reacting, and if you're the dominant voice, practice space making. Pause, ask, let silence hang, let someone finish. Because real conversation isn't just about what's said, but about who's allowed to say it fully without rushing to the period. You join a new group, no one tells you how to behave, but you start adjusting. You laugh the way they laugh, you use their slang, mirror their opinions, even change how you sit. It happens automatically. You're not faking, you're adapting. That's social inclusion mimicry, the silent process of mirroring behaviors, speech, and emotional rhythms to signal belonging. It's not manipulation, it's survival. We mimic not to deceive, but to connect. Because being in sync makes people trust you, like you. It starts in childhood when kids imitate their parents or peers to fit in, and it doesn't stop. In every new context, work, friendships, dating, you subconsciously scan the group and adjust your social posture. If people speak softly, you soften. If they joke sarcastically, you match tone. If they're emotionally guarded, you become less expressive. You might not even notice, but your nervous system does. This rule explains why you feel different versions of yourself with different people. You're not two-faced, you're mirroring, performing a version of yourself that feels most welcome. But here's the catch. Over time, the line between mimicry and identity blurs. You start believing that you like certain things, but maybe you just learn to enjoy them through others. You start avoiding certain behaviors, not because they're wrong, but because no one else in the group does them. You begin to edit yourself, not maliciously, but subtly, smoothly, until the real you becomes harder to find. The rule also explains groupthink. People mirror not just behaviors, but beliefs, politics, values, emotional responses. And once a certain stance becomes dominant in a group, others follow not out of agreement, but out of alignment. To break this cycle, start noticing when you adjust. What do you say differently depending on who's in the room? What do you withhold? What do you exaggerate? Then ask, is this me, or is this who I think I need to be to stay close? Social inclusion mimicry isn't inherently bad. It creates harmony. But when used constantly, it can erode individuality. And the most powerful version of connection isn't blending in, it's being different and still being accepted. You like someone, a friend, a crush, a collaborator, but instead of telling them directly, you hint, you test, you wait for them to make the first move, and if they don't, you tell yourself it was probably nothing. That's rejection risk management, the internal strategy that governs how we express interest, need, or affection only when the odds feel safe. We don't avoid connection, we avoid vulnerability without certainty. This rule runs deep. Because rejection isn't just uncomfortable, it's biologically painful. Studies show that social rejection activates the same brain areas as physical pain, so we don't take risks lightly. We text only when they've texted first. We compliment only if it feels earned. We share feelings only after confirmation they're mutual. If there's any doubt, we wait. We protect ourselves. This creates emotional standoff situations, both people waiting for the other to go first. No one wanting to lose face, no one wanting to be too much, so they both retreat, and a potential connection dies not from dislike but from self-protection. The rule also shapes how we reject others. We ghost instead of saying, I'm not interested. We act vague instead of honest, not to hurt, but to minimize reaction. But the result is confusion, not kindness, and the fear of rejection grows even stronger. Over time, this strategy becomes habitual. You learn to limit your bids for connection. You tell yourself it's about pride, standards, dignity, but deep down it's fear, the fear of being seen fully and not chosen. And yet every deep connection began with someone risking. Someone saying, I like you, I need help, I miss you. Without a script, without a guarantee, that's what makes it real. To challenge this rule, ask yourself, what truth am I holding back because it might not be returned, and what's the cost of never saying it? Because yes, rejection hurts, but silence lingers, and it kills what could have been before it even begins. You give feedback to a friend, but you phrase it gently. Maybe consider this instead of this isn't working. You express a boundary but make it sound optional. It'd be nice if, instead of I need, you tell someone how you feel but you pad it with, I'm probably overreacting, but this is truth softening bias, the automatic impulse to dilute, round off, or downplay our truth to make it more digestible for others. It's not lying, it's cushioning. You still say what's real, just not in its full force. The goal isn't deception, it's preservation of the relationship, of the tone, of your image. You don't want to sound mean or too harsh or too sensitive, so you adjust, shape, blur. The message becomes softer but also less clear. This happens in families, workplaces, relationships. People say I'm a little disappointed when they're actually furious. It's kind of hard for me when they're breaking. I'd prefer if you didn't when they mean stop. The bias comes from fear that full honesty will create conflict, push people away, or make you seem difficult. So you try to say just enough to be understood, but not so much that it triggers a reaction. The problem is soft truth doesn't always land. People misunderstand it, dismiss it, forget it, and you're left feeling unheard even though you did speak, just not clearly. Over time, this leads to resentment. You feel like you've communicated but nothing changes, and they feel confused because they didn't receive what you really meant. The gap grows, the connection thins, and everyone thinks they were honest, but no one truly was. To challenge this bias, practice emotional accuracy. Instead of I guess, say I know. Instead of kind of upset, say hurt. Instead of it'd be nice, say I need this. You don't have to be cruel, just clean. Because soft truth feels safe, but sharp truth creates clarity. And clarity is the only foundation strong enough to hold real connection. You meet a friend and you hug, you say love you. Before hanging up, you like their photo, leave heart emojis, send thinking of you messages. All signs of care, all gestures of affection. But how deep is it? That's the surface affection code, the cultural pattern of frequent performative affection that signals emotional closeness without requiring emotional depth. It's not fake, it's not empty, but it's coded, standardized, predictable, familiar. We've developed a whole language of light, repeated emotional cues. Miss you, you're the best, we need to hang out soon. They create warmth, but often they don't go further. You can say I love you to someone and still not know how they're actually doing. You can get daily hearts from a friend and still feel completely alone because the code is designed for frequency, not intimacy. It lets people feel connected without having to dig, without having to sit in discomfort. Without having to ask, what's really going on with you lately? This rule is everywhere in modern communication. Quick texts instead of real calls, short affirmations instead of deep check-ins, emotional emojis instead of emotional presence. And while it keeps relationships warm, it can also keep them shallow, because both sides think they're showing up. I text them all the time. We say we love each other. We like each other's stuff. But beneath that, there may be very little substance. And the risk is this: in a moment of real need, all the surface affection vanishes. The love you becomes sorry I can't help right now. The daily heart emojis become silence, because the code wasn't designed to hold weight, just to simulate proximity. Breaking the pattern doesn't mean stopping affection, it means matching it with depth. Send the emoji, then ask a real question. Say love you, then say why. Make the small gestures, but don't let them replace the big ones. Because emotional nutrition doesn't come from flavor, it comes from fullness. And we're starving each other with sweetness when what we need is substance. You're in a group chat and someone shares an opinion. You're not sure you agree, but you see others nodding, reacting positively, saying exactly. So you say something supportive too, not because you fully believe it, but because you don't want to be the only one pushing back. That's the peer alignment reflex, the automatic impulse to synchronize with group sentiment, especially when social belonging is at stake. It's not cowardice, it's biology. Human beings are wired for inclusion. Being in sync with the group used to mean survival. Disagreement, even silent disagreement, registered as danger, and that wiring hasn't changed. So in modern contexts, we adapt our tone, our phrasing, even our opinions, not to manipulate but to remain cohesive. The reflex is strongest when the group is emotionally charged. Everyone's venting, everyone's celebrating, everyone's outraged, and you feel the pull. Even if you're unsure, even if your gut says, wait, you echo. You amplify, you nod, because to dissent is to isolate, and we fear that more than being wrong. The danger of this reflex is that it distorts belief. Over time, you forget what you actually think. You start believing what the group believes, not through reason but through repetition. You become fluent in alignment and hesitant in individuality. This is how echo chambers form, not from censorship but from subtle self-correction. One voice grows loud and others adjust to match. Even in small settings, families, teams, circles of friends, the dominant emotional tone becomes law, and deviation feels like betrayal. To challenge this reflex, you have to practice internal pause. When someone says something bold, don't rush to agree or disagree. First ask, what do I think about this? And when you do speak, consider that alignment is not the only form of loyalty. Sometimes real connection means saying, I hear you, but I see it differently. Peer alignment reflex keeps peace, but unchallenged, it also creates performance, not presence, and there's no freedom in always being in tune with what you haven't chosen. You post about a cause, you retweet a trending injustice. You comment, you share, you show your stance, but do you do anything offline? That question lingers not just for others, but for yourself. This is public morality display, the social habit of broadcasting moral alignment in public, often as a substitute for deeper engagement. It's not always performative. It can be sincere, but the publicness changes the function. When morality is visible, it becomes currency. It tells people who you are, what tribe you're in, how good you are according to the current code. This shows up in how we talk, what we condemn, what we praise. Online especially, it becomes rhythmic. Something happens and people know what they're supposed to say. This is unacceptable. We must do better. Silence is violence. The tone is predictable, the outrage automatic. And because everyone is saying it, not saying it feels suspicious. You're quiet, maybe you don't care, you're neutral. Maybe you're complicit, so people join in, sometimes from passion, sometimes from pressure. Either way, the display becomes more important than the depth. Over time, this creates moral fatigue. People post because they have to, not because they want to. They care, but they don't know how to care beyond the performance, so they substitute real action with alignment signaling. I shared the link, I used the hashtag, I did my part. The problem isn't visibility, it's only visibility. When public morality becomes disconnected from private responsibility, the virtue becomes hollow. And worse, it distracts. It gives the illusion of change without transformation. To challenge this rule, ask yourself, would I still care about this if no one saw me post about it? What do I do when the trend dies down? How much of my morality is broadcast and how much is embodied? Because real virtue is quiet, it doesn't need applause, and often it doesn't come with a caption. It just acts even when no one's watching. You didn't realize how unhappy you were in the relationship until it ended. You didn't realize how unfair your boss was until you quit. You didn't realize how much a friendship drained you until months after it faded. This is the delayed clarity reflex, the mind's defense mechanism of revealing emotional truths only after the threat has passed. It's not denial, it's survival. In the moment, clarity would be costly. You'd have to act, speak, disrupt something stable. So instead, your brain hides the full truth until it's safe to feel it. You convince yourself it's not that bad. Everyone has flaws. Maybe it's just me. These aren't lies, they're buffers, designed to protect you from an unbearable insight at an inconvenient time. The clarity comes later, when the danger is gone, when the consequences are removed, when your nervous system relaxes enough to let you look back honestly. That's when the truth hits, the patterns you missed, the resentment you swallowed. The red flags you explained away, and you wonder, how did I not see it? But the better question is, what was I protecting by not seeing it? The answer is usually peace. Stability, hope, or the fear of being alone. Delayed clarity hurts because it feels like betrayal, not from others, but from yourself. You were there, you lived it. How could you not know? But your body did. Your gut flinched. Your tone changed. Your laughter faded. You just couldn't name it yet. Because naming would require action, and you weren't ready. The danger of this reflex is that it erodes self-trust. You start doubting your instincts, your memory, your decisions. You become afraid to believe yourself, but clarity delayed is still clarity, and what matters isn't when it arrives, but what you do once it does. You can mourn the time lost, or you can honor the part of you that waited and now, finally, is ready to see. You show up late but act like you rushed. You send a message but wait a few minutes before hitting send so it doesn't seem too eager. You do something small but frame it like it took hours. That's perceived effort signaling, the social instinct to appear like you've invested time, thought, or energy, even if the reality was different, because effort, or the illusion of it, equals value. In modern social psychology, people often don't evaluate outcomes directly. They evaluate the cost it seems to have taken to get there. A quick gift might feel meaningless, but if it looks handmade, even if it's not, it feels deeper. A compliment feels more real if it seems spontaneous, not rehearsed. A text feels more sincere if it comes late at night, signaling sacrifice. This rule shapes how people manage impressions. You want to look like you care, but not like you're trying too hard. You want to show investment without appearing desperate. So you learn how to pace your words, frame your actions, add just enough imperfection to signal authenticity. The same rule applies to work. You highlight how much time a task took, how many revisions, how many drafts, because the visible struggle validates the final product. Even in relationships, we value gestures that feel earned. Someone doing something kind after a long day means more than if they were free all afternoon. The effort becomes the message. But the danger of this rule is that it incentivizes perceived effort more than real care. People start performing labor, not doing it. They act tired, not because they are, but because looking tired makes them seem dedicated. They speak slowly, not because they're thoughtful, but because it makes them seem serious. This creates a culture where sincerity is measured in strain, and subtle, quiet acts of love get overlooked. To break this mindset, ask, am I trying to help or trying to look like I'm helping? Am I being generous or performative? Because real effort doesn't always signal itself, and some of the deepest care is invisible, silent, effortless, but real. You hear someone lost their job, you nod, say that's tough, and move on. A few hours later, your friend texts that they're upset about being left on read, and suddenly you drop everything to talk them through it. Why does one problem trigger real concern and the other just a passing reaction? That's the selective concern reflex, the tendency to emotionally engage based not on the severity of a situation, but on its personal salience. It's not about what matters most. It's about what feels closest. You respond more intensely to someone you're bonded with, even if their issue is trivial, than to a stranger's deep crisis. This reflex isn't cruelty, it's bandwidth. Emotional energy is limited, so your brain allocates concern based on emotional investment, familiarity, and contextual proximity, not logic. That's why a friend's breakup can shake you more than a war in another country. Why your partner's bad day hurts more than a stranger's tragedy. Why a minor disagreement at work occupies your mind longer than an entire news cycle. Selective concern also explains why people appear cold to some causes while being deeply moved by others. It's not always apathy, it's connection bias. If the story touches their world through culture, values, identity, they care. If not, they observe from a distance. And sometimes they rationalize the distance. It's complicated, it's not my business, I don't have the full story. But really, the reflex has already filtered it out. The danger is that we confuse this reflex for morality, that we believe we're better people because we feel more about the things that feel close. But feeling deeply doesn't mean acting wisely, and lack of immediate concern doesn't mean lack of humanity. To balance the reflex, zoom out. What gets your emotional energy and why? Who do you consistently show up for? Who do you consistently ignore? Not out of malice, but reflex. And what does that say about your emotional map? Selective concern is natural, but awareness is the key to making sure your empathy doesn't become a mirror, reflecting only the people who already look like you. You're listening to someone talk about their pain. You nod, say, I totally get it, offer a few well-placed, that's rough, and I'm here for you. But the whole time your mind is elsewhere, not because you don't care, but because you don't feel what they feel. Still, you act like you do. That's passive empathy mimicry, the behavior of displaying empathy cues without actually engaging the emotional depth they represent. You mirror the performance of care, facial expressions, vocal tone, phrases, but the emotional motor behind them isn't always running. This isn't manipulation, it's social instinct. You've learned that people need to feel understood, and you've learned the signals that create that illusion: reflective listening, warm tone, supportive language, and when done well, it works. The other person feels seen. Even if you're not feeling with them, they still feel held. Passive empathy mimicry is useful in high-stress roles: therapists, doctors, customer service, leaders. You can't absorb every emotion fully or you'd collapse, so you simulate empathy to maintain connection without emotional depletion. But outside those roles in personal life, this pattern becomes dangerous, because over time, the people around you feel emotionally met, but only on the surface. Their pain was acknowledged but not joined. They feel better in the moment, but lonelier in the long run. And you, the empathizer, start to lose touch with what real empathy feels like. You begin to associate care with behavior, not emotion. It becomes muscle memory, not heart response. And eventually you may struggle to tell the difference yourself. The deeper cost is disconnection masked as closeness. People think you're emotionally available, but they never actually reach you. You're the kind one, the calm one, the safe one, but not the one who feels with them. To unlearn this, don't perform more, feel more. Ask, am I responding from understanding or from pattern? Have I paused to feel what they're describing, or am I just managing the conversation? Passive empathy mimicry isn't evil, but real empathy, it's messy, quiet, present, and sometimes all it says is, that hurts, and I'm just going to sit here with you for a minute. You share a success. That's so you, someone says. You express doubt. You're always so hard on yourself, they reply. You try something new and someone says, that's not like you. These are identity reinforcement cues, subtle verbal signals that reflect, confirm, or resist your perceived self-image. They seem harmless, supportive even, but they shape you quietly, consistently, deeply. Every time someone says, you're the funny one, you're so chill, you're not usually emotional, they're reinforcing a character, not just describing you, freezing you, locking you into a social identity that becomes harder to change. This rule works both ways. We seek cues that validate who we believe we are, and we absorb cues that tell us who we're supposed to be. You start to expect yourself to be consistent, not because it's authentic, but because people expect it from you. And breaking that mold feels like social dissonance. People notice, they question, you're acting different lately. Is everything okay? And even if you're growing, it feels like betrayal, like you're stepping out of costume mid-performance. Over time, these reinforcement cues become scripts. You play the confident one even when you're scared. You play the responsible one even when you're falling apart. You avoid creativity because you've been labeled practical. You avoid sensitivity because you've been labeled strong. And every time someone reflects that identity back to you, it feels safer to stay in it. This rule also explains why personal change is hardest around old friends, family, or anyone who's known you for a long time, because they're fluent in your old cues. And every conversation is shaped by who they remember you to be, not who you're becoming. To challenge this, notice your own language. What roles do you assign others? How often do you say, "You're always like this, you've never been that kind of person"? And for yourself, ask, is this who I am or just who I've been told I am? Identity isn't fixed, but the more it's reinforced socially, the more it hardens. The real risk isn't being misunderstood, it's never giving yourself permission to evolve. You're in a friend group, you all speak a certain way, share certain opinions, avoid certain topics. Someone new joins, they don't follow the script, they say too much, feel too strongly, or ask the wrong question. You feel it instantly, the tension, the shift, and you do what the rest do, you either correct them gently or ignore it and hope they adjust. That's group norm preservation, the unspoken rule that maintains emotional and behavioral uniformity within a collective. Not to suppress, but to stabilize. Every group has invisible rules: what's appropriate, what's off limits, what tone is allowed, how much vulnerability is too much. These norms aren't written. They're absorbed through repetition, through mimicry, through feedback. Break them and you don't get punished directly. You get awkward silences, quick subject changes, private conversations later. These are soft enforcements, but powerful, because they don't just nudge behavior, they shape identity. You don't just act different in groups, you become a different version of yourself to maintain harmony. This is why people act radically different across friend circles. In one group, you're the emotional one. In another, the logical one. In one space, you talk freely about dreams. In another, you joke about them. Group norms define the emotional temperature and you adapt to stay warm, but the cost is invisible. You might stop talking about what really matters to you. You might flatten your personality to fit. You might even become intolerant of those who threaten the group's rhythm, not because they're wrong, but because they disrupt the shared script. The norm is preserved, but authenticity is sacrificed. To challenge this, ask, who am I when I'm with these people? What parts of me show up and what parts go quiet? And more importantly, are the group norms built on honesty, curiosity, and growth, or on safety, sameness, and emotional convenience? Because the group isn't always right, and harmony built on suppression eventually turns into silence that no one dares break. You're in a conversation, someone shares an idea you've heard before. It wasn't particularly new, but everyone nods. One person says exactly. Another says, that's what I was thinking. And suddenly the idea gains weight. It starts to feel more important, more true. That's the echo agreement effect, when repeated affirmation, especially in group settings, amplifies the perceived validity of an idea, regardless of its actual merit. It's not logic that wins, it's resonance. We're wired to respond to consensus. The more people agree, the more confident we feel in that shared belief, even if the belief is shallow, flawed, or only half true. This effect is especially powerful when agreement comes quickly. Rapid support from others doesn't just validate the idea, it validates you for expressing it. The emotional reward locks in the behavior. Say more of that, share more opinions like this. It also happens on the receiving side. If no one pushes back, we assume we're right. We stop questioning, we stop checking, we trust the echo, but the truth is agreement doesn't equal accuracy, and what we often interpret as collective insight is just collective comfort. Everyone agreeing because disagreement would slow things down or feel awkward or risk isolation. In online spaces, this rule creates false confidence. One tweet gets retweeted, one comment gets liked. Suddenly it becomes common sense, even if it's oversimplified, even if it's harmful. The echo adds authority, and the dissenting voice, even if thoughtful, sounds jarring not because it's wrong, but because it breaks the rhythm. In relationships, this shows up as habitual yesing. Yeah, totally. You're right, same here, not out of alignment, but out of emotional inertia. We like harmony, we like being liked, so we agree more than we mean to. And slowly we train each other to stay in a narrow band of safe opinions. To challenge the effect, pause before echoing. Ask, do I actually believe this, or am I just riding the wave? And if you're receiving agreement, ask, is this applause or is it just momentum? Echoes feel like truth, but only silence reveals if there was depth behind the sound. You get a compliment, you look nice today, not that you don't always look nice. Or that was a smart idea, I mean, we all contributed, but yours stood out. The praise feels warm and then slightly deflated. That's compliment cushioning, the instinct to soften, dilute, or buffer positive feedback to avoid discomfort, awkwardness, or perceived imbalance. It sounds like kindness, but it often functions as a form of emotional hedging. We want to affirm someone, but not too much. We want to praise them, but not elevate them, or ourselves, or create a power imbalance, so we add qualifiers, we wrap compliments in disclaimers, we balance them with jokes. Nice work on the report, I mean it wasn't perfect, but solid. Why do we do this? Because raw praise can feel exposed. Giving a compliment is vulnerable. It requires clarity, directness, emotional presence, but many of us were raised to be humble, not expressive, to avoid extremes. To keep the emotional temperature moderate, so even when we admire someone, we hesitate to say it cleanly. Compliment cushioning also arises from fear of being misread. If I say too much, will it seem like I want something? Will it come off as flirting? Will they think I'm being fake? To avoid all that, we edit. And the result is a compliment that almost lands, but not fully. For the receiver, the impact is confusing. You hear something nice and then hear it walk back. You feel appreciated and then slightly uncertain. And over time, if all your compliments are cushioned, you begin to doubt any of them are real. The antidote is direct praise. Simple, clear, unbuffered. You handled that really well. You have a sharp mind. That made my day. No trailing justifications, no apologies, no emotional disclaimers, just truth unwrapped. It might feel awkward at first, but the clarity it gives is rare. And in a world of half compliments and polite distance, uncut admiration is a radical act of connection. You want to express disagreement, but you start with, I totally see where you're coming from. You want to share a controversial thought, so you say, maybe this is just me, but you want to criticize something, so you begin with, no offense, but this is non-offensive framing, the subtle language technique we use to soften the impact of a potentially uncomfortable message, especially when we fear emotional backlash. It's not bad faith, it's not manipulation, it's emotional diplomacy. We preface, qualify, soften, all to signal, I'm not a threat. The strategy works. It makes people more receptive, it reduces defensiveness, it keeps conversations smoother. But it also creates a culture of emotional vagueness, where nothing is said directly, where every idea has a disclaimer, where clarity gets buried under caution. Non-offensive framing shows up most in sensitive environments, workplaces, social media, fragile relationships. You want to express yourself but also avoid offense. So you bend your words into shapes that fit everyone's comfort zone. The message is there, but it's blurry. That's an interesting take instead of I disagree. I'm curious about your reasoning instead of that doesn't make sense to me. The result, no one knows what anyone really thinks. Everyone's respectful, but few are honest. This habit also affects self-expression. You might downplay your real opinion just to avoid friction. You might edit your tone so much that you no longer recognize your own voice. You might spend more time framing the message than actually delivering it. The danger is emotional misalignment. People believe you're agreeing when you're not. People think things are fine when they're not. And conflicts remain dormant, not resolved. To break the pattern, try practicing polite precision. You don't have to be blunt, but you do have to be real. Say, I disagree and here's why. Say, I see it differently. Say, this doesn't sit right with me. Then hold the silence. Let it be heard, because clarity isn't cruelty, and the most respectful thing you can do isn't soften, it's trust someone enough to tell them the truth plainly. You hear an idea you don't like. Instead of saying, I don't agree, you say, I'm not sure about that. Instead of I think that's wrong, you say, interesting perspective. Instead of this doesn't make sense, you say, I wonder if there's another way to look at it. This is weak disagreement phrasing, the instinct to phrase disagreement so gently, so vaguely, that it's not even clear a disagreement happened. The goal isn't to deceive, it's to avoid conflict, social discomfort, emotional tension. You want to challenge without triggering, question without confrontation, disagree without destabilizing the room. This is especially common in collaborative settings. In meetings, group chats, creative teams, people tiptoe around disagreement to keep things smooth. They don't want to be difficult, so they speak in fog. I kind of feel like, maybe it's just me, but it could be interesting to explore another direction. These phrases sound thoughtful, but they often replace clear opposition with emotional camouflage. And while they may protect feelings, they confuse intentions. The problem? The person you're disagreeing with might not even know you disagreed. They hear that's interesting and assume support. They hear good point and hear only the good point, and so nothing changes. The issue persists, and the unspoken disagreement grows into quiet resentment. This phrasing habit also hurts you. You start losing your sharp edge, you forget how to name things directly, you train yourself to buffer your thoughts so much that even you lose track of what you were trying to say. The solution isn't rudeness, it's precision. Say, I disagree with this part. Say, here's where I see it differently. Say, I think we're missing something. Then speak your mind clearly, not as an attack, but as an offering. Because truth doesn't need to be loud, but it does need to be heard. And disagreement isn't a threat to connection. It's how real alignment gets built, not on soft fog, but on the solid ground of clear, respectful honesty. You've been slowly pulling away from a friend. You don't respond as fast. You stop initiating plans. Your messages are shorter, but you never say you're leaving, you never say goodbye. This is the passive exit strategy, the silent departure technique where someone withdraws emotionally or socially without confrontation, without explanation, without closure. It's not coldness, it's avoidance. It's the belief that fading out is kinder, or at least safer, than facing discomfort directly. You don't want to hurt them, you don't want to deal with their feelings, you don't want to have the conversation, so you let time do the work for you. Slow distance, fewer replies. Eventually, the connection dies on its own or seems to. The reason this strategy feels easier is because most people don't know how to end relationships, not just romantic ones, but friendships, collaborations, social ties. We're taught how to start things, not how to end them. We fear guilt. We fear being seen as selfish. We fear conflict, so we disappear just enough to be gone, but not enough to look like we chose to leave. It's also a strategy of emotional protection. If you leave without announcing it, you never have to hear what the other person thinks of you. You never have to justify yourself. You never have to feel their sadness or anger. You just vanish slowly, quietly, safely. But for the person on the receiving end, it's often brutal. They're left confused. They replay past conversations, wondering what went wrong. They don't get answers. They don't get a story, just silence. And that silence becomes a wound. The passive exit is not evil, but it is unfinished. It skips the hard part, truth. It denies both people the chance to grow from the ending, and over time it trains you to escape instead of communicate. The antidote is not dramatic confrontation. It's honest closure, a message that says, I've grown apart. I need space. This isn't right for me anymore. It may feel harder in the moment, but it prevents confusion that lasts for years, because exits don't have to be violent. They can be clear, clean, respectful, but only if you have the courage to speak the goodbye out loud. You need help with something, but instead of asking directly, you say, wow, this is harder than I expected. You want someone to stop talking so loudly, so you say, my head is pounding today. You're trying to express a need, but through a hint, a signal, a suggestion. That's the indirect assertion reflex, the instinct to express desire, discomfort, or boundaries through implication instead of clarity. It's not deception, it's a safety mechanism. A way to assert something while leaving room for retreat in case it's rejected. We do this when we don't feel safe being direct, when we fear conflict, when we were raised in environments where asking directly was punished or ignored, so we drop clues instead. We make comments that almost say what we want, but not quite, and we wait, hoping the other person picks up the signal. The problem is most people don't, or they misread it, or they ignore it because it wasn't a clear ask. So your need remains unmet, and your frustration grows. You think they don't care. They're not listening, but the truth is you never said it plainly. This reflex also shows up in relationships. I guess I'll just go alone instead of I wish you'd come with me. It's fine, don't worry instead of that hurt me. The tone, the pause, the sigh, it's all a language of shadows, and it often leads to misunderstandings. You feel like you communicated, they feel like nothing was said. You think they're being selfish, they think you're being moody, and both of you walk away misaligned. To undo the reflex, you have to rebuild your relationship with directness. You have to believe that your needs are valid and that others deserve the chance to meet them clearly. Say, I need help. Can you lower your voice? I want your support. It might feel unnatural at first, exposed, but it's how trust is built, not by guessing each other's signals, but by saying the signal out loud. Because real connection isn't a test of mind reading, it's a practice of direct, respectful honesty. You're in a group, someone makes a statement you disagree with, but you say nothing. You're with friends who all love a show you secretly think is overrated, but you nod along. You have a perspective, an insight, a real opinion, but you keep it in your head. This is quiet opinion masking, the silent suppression of your true thoughts in order to preserve harmony, avoid conflict, or maintain inclusion. It's a strategy of self-preservation. You weigh the risk of speaking up and decide it's not worth it. So you wear the mask, you agree outwardly, or at least stay neutral, and you convince yourself it's no big deal, one conversation, one moment, but over time it becomes a habit, a pattern of passive conformity. You stop sharing what you really think, not because you're dishonest, but because you don't feel safe being fully honest. Maybe the group is reactive. Maybe someone dominates the space. Maybe you've been punished before for saying something unpopular. So your brain learns to scan the room and hide what doesn't fit. This happens everywhere: work meetings, family dinners, online threads. It's why people often share their real views only in private or anonymously. Because in public, truth can cost you respect, reputation, belonging, so we edit ourselves into versions we think others can accept. But this creates two realities, the one we show and the one we live in. The longer they stay apart, the more isolated we feel. Even when surrounded by people, even when included, because it's not you they're accepting, it's your performance. Breaking this pattern takes courage. Start small, disagree respectfully, share a minority opinion, say I see it differently. You don't have to dominate the space, but you do have to show up in it. And if the room rejects your truth, maybe that room wasn't made for you, because belonging at the cost of your voice is not belonging, it's silence disguised as connection. You're really smart for someone your age. You look great, have you lost weight? That was surprisingly good. These are conditional compliments, statements that pretend to uplift but sneak in a qualifier, a comparison, or a subtle judgment. They often sound positive on the surface but leave a strange aftertaste, like something else was being said. That's because they're not pure praise, they're praise with conditions. The person is saying something nice but measuring it against a hidden standard. And that standard reveals their actual belief. You're funny for a girl. Translation, I don't usually expect girls to be funny. You're really articulate for someone from your background. Translation, I assumed people from your background are. This pattern isn't always malicious. Sometimes people don't realize they're doing it. They want to compliment but can't let go of the comparison in their head, so it leaks into their words. Other times, it's subconscious status assertion. A way to remind the other person of their place. To say, you did well considering what you are. Conditional compliments also function as subtle backhanded control. They uplift while limiting, they acknowledge while boxing in. And for the person receiving them, the confusion is real. Should I feel flattered or insulted? Should I thank them or correct them? Over time, these compliments wear on self-esteem. You start feeling like you have to prove yourself against assumptions you never asked for. Your wins are only valid if they exceed someone's expectations. The antidote, give and ask for unconditional praise. You're talented. That was excellent. You handled that with skill. No, for someone who, no, I didn't expect that, just the truth on its own. And when you hear a conditional compliment, don't always let it slide. You can ask, what did you mean by that? Not with aggression, but with clarity. Because sometimes people don't realize their compliment carried a leash. And if you name it, they might drop it and start praising people with fewer strings attached. You ask a direct question, they smile and say, that's a great question, but don't answer it. You bring up something emotional, they pause, sigh, and say, let me think about how to word this. The response feels thoughtful, maybe even kind, but it's not an answer, it's a delay. This is the conversational delay tactic, the subtle way people buy time, shift emotional weight, or avoid a clear response by stretching the space between question and reply. It looks like care, but often hides calculation. The tactic works because silence signals depth. Pauses make us think the person is being precise or sensitive, but many times the pause is protective. It's a moment to rehearse, to edit, to find the safest version of the truth. We use this tactic when the real answer might cause conflict, rejection, or vulnerability. When someone asks, how do you feel about what I said? And the real feeling is messy or unpleasant, we say, I'm still processing. Sometimes that's true. But often it's avoidance dressed as introspection. Leaders use it in public. We're exploring options. We hear your concerns, no commitment, just verbal buffering. The tactic is also common in personal relationships. Can we talk about this later? I'm not in the right headspace right now. These might be legitimate boundaries or convenient shields. What makes the tactic hard to detect is tone. It often sounds gentle, diplomatic, emotionally mature, but if overused, it erodes clarity. The person on the other side feels unheard, confused, stuck in limbo. They came with openness and got fog. The key to spotting it is pattern. If someone always delays when faced with vulnerability or accountability, it's not emotional depth, it's control. And the antidote is compassionate directness. I respect that you need space, but I also need honesty. You don't have to give a perfect answer, just a real one. Because truth doesn't always need time. Sometimes it just needs courage. And if we're always delaying it, we're not protecting anyone, we're just postponing connection. You're at dinner and someone says something you mildly disagree with. You want to speak up but hold back. Why start tension over something small? A friend shares a problematic opinion. You nod vaguely, change the topic. Why make it awkward? This is social friction minimization, the internal rule that says, don't disturb the peace unless you have to. Don't be the one who makes things weird. Don't be the spark for conflict. It's not weakness, it's social instinct. Most of us are trained from childhood to get along, to be polite, to avoid drama. So we become emotional thermostats, constantly adjusting our reactions to keep the room stable, even if it means swallowing discomfort. The logic is, short-term peace is better than temporary disruption. But the problem is, constant friction avoidance leads to long-term dishonesty. You start nodding when you don't agree, laughing when something bothers you, staying when you want to leave. This creates a life of small, constant compromises, none of which explode but all of which drain you. Social friction isn't always bad, it's how truth surfaces, it's how boundaries are drawn, it's how deeper respect is formed. Without it, relationships become shallow performances, polished but empty. People-pleasing is often just friction avoidance with a smile. And over time, it makes you resentful, you feel invisible, but you help build the mask, so how do you break the pattern? Not by becoming confrontational, but by accepting small doses of discomfort. A simple, actually I see it differently, or that doesn't sit right with me, It's not about being combative, it's about being present. If the relationship is real, it will survive tension. If it can't, it was never built on honesty. Social harmony is valuable, but it shouldn't cost you your voice, because peace that requires silence is just fear wearing polite clothes. You're angry, but you smile. You're annoyed, but you laugh it off. You're hurt, but you say, it's fine. This is the behavior smoothing reflex, the automatic instinct to neutralize visible emotion in order to appear calm, likable, or stable. It's not manipulation, it's adaptation. You've learned that strong reactions can make others uncomfortable, so you sand down your tone, you soften your language, you repackage raw emotion into something easier to digest. This reflex shows up everywhere, especially in settings where image matters: work, dating, family gatherings. You say maybe instead of no. You say kind of upset instead of furious. You say I get it when you don't. The goal isn't honesty, it's palatability. You want to be taken seriously but not seem dramatic. You want to express pain but still look composed. You want to show need without appearing needy. Over time, this reflex can become so ingrained that you no longer know how you actually feel. You only know the version of emotion you're allowed to show. Anger becomes irritation. Sadness becomes tiredness. Hurt becomes silence. And people around you may never know when they've crossed a line because you've trained yourself to hide it. Ironically, this reflex is often rewarded. People call you mature, graceful, stoic, but they don't realize they're praising emotional suppression. And when real expression finally erupts, it looks out of character. But it was always there, just buried under years of smoothing. The antidote isn't to explode, it's to be accurate. If you're hurt, say hurt. If you're angry, say angry. Not cruelly, not dramatically, but truthfully. Emotion doesn't need to be loud to be real. It just needs to be named. Because only then can others understand you, and only then can you stay true to what's alive inside. You're messaging someone new, one reply per day, you match their pace. If they use emojis, you use emojis. If they stop using exclamation points, so do you. It's not mimicry, it's calibration. This is interpersonal distance calibration, the subtle social mechanism where we adjust our emotional proximity to match, not overwhelm the other person. You want to be close but not clingy, interested but not intense, available but not desperate. But you study their rhythm, tone, frequency, and you mirror it. This isn't deception, it's social intelligence. A way to respect boundaries without being told, to match someone's comfort zone without forcing your own. But it's also exhausting, because instead of being authentic, you're always reacting. You send a long message, they respond with lol. So next time you shrink, you initiate a plan, they say maybe. So next time you wait, slowly your behavior becomes less about you and more about them. The danger is you start losing track of what you actually want. Do you want to talk daily, or are you just matching their distance? Do you want to open up, or are you just afraid they'll pull away? Calibration becomes self-erasure. And if both people are doing it, no one leads, no one sets the pace. Both wait, both mirror, both stay guarded. The connection stalls. Real relationships require risk. At some point, someone has to go first, be warmer, be clearer, be bolder. Not recklessly, but sincerely. Calibration can start a conversation, but only authenticity can build one. You don't have to match someone's distance forever. Sometimes you have to walk at your real pace and see if they meet you there. If they do, you grow. If they don't, at least you showed up as yourself, not just as their reflection. You're in a group conversation. One person talks the most, another agrees the fastest, a third waits, then drops a well-timed joke that earns quiet respect. No one's holding a scoreboard, but everyone's playing. This is silent status management, the unspoken negotiation of social rank that happens without anyone admitting it's real. It's not about bragging, it's about subtle cues. Who interrupts whom, who gets interrupted, who gets listened to, who gets ignored. You can feel it in tone, pacing, eye contact. Someone tells a story, people lean in. Another speaks, and phones come out. This isn't always about merit, it's about perceived value, and people learn to manage it quietly. Some speak less so their words carry more weight. Some act unimpressed to signal high standards. Others laugh strategically, agree strategically, stay neutral until they sense who the dominant voice is. Even compliments get political. Say too many and you look submissive. Say none and you risk being seen as cold. So you choose carefully who to praise, when, and how much. We call it vibe, presence, intuition, but it's status calibration. Online, it's even clearer. Influencers post casually to maintain approachability while signaling high status through brands, angles, or aesthetics. In group chats, people delay replies to appear busy or detached. It's not always conscious, but it's always happening. The danger: if you're unaware, you get played, you overexplain, you chase. You try too hard and drop in the invisible ranking. Silent status management punishes neediness, rewards mystique. The ones who appear least affected often gain the most power, but that too is a performance. The strongest signal of status today: effortless presence, appearing calm, clear, and above the scramble, even if you're not. Because in a world where everyone's performing value, the one who seems like they don't have to wins. You tell a joke you don't find funny, but others do, so you keep telling it. You post a take online not because you believe it deeply, but because you know it'll get likes. Someone says you're so sweet, and now you always act sweet around them even when you're not feeling it. This is predictable approval seeking, the behavioral loop where your actions slowly reshape to match what others reward. It starts small, a compliment here, a laugh there, but soon your identity bends. You wear what people praised before, you avoid what once brought silence. You adjust tone, interest, even values, not out of deception, but out of craving. The approval becomes a map, a guide, a drug, and the most addictive part is how predictable it becomes. You know what version of you wins smiles, you know which opinions get applause, so you replay them, reuse them, reduce yourself to a reliable pattern of validation. It's easy to confuse this with personality, but it's not stable. The moment approval shifts, you feel lost. The moment someone disapproves, your self-image cracks because it wasn't built on truth, it was built on response. This loop thrives in environments where praise is scarce or unpredictable. Childhood, social media, dating, spaces where attention feels earned, not given, and so you chase it, endlessly. The danger is you forget what's real. You don't know if you love that hobby or if people just once said it was cool. You don't know if you're kind or if you're just addicted to being called kind. Predictable approval seeking isn't about lying, it's about forgetting. Forgetting the version of you that exists when no one is watching. The one who doesn't need an audience to feel valid. Reclaiming that self isn't about rebellion, it's about stillness. Doing something, saying something, being something without checking who's clapping. Because the truest version of you doesn't perform, it just exists, quietly, authentically. And maybe bravely.